It's time to talk about some freaks. It's quite an intro to the show, right? But that actually is what we are talking about today for Notre Dame. Today, we're Ryan Roberts. That's right there. That guy right there. That's our Irish Breakdown's director of recruiting. And also me, the publisher at Irish Breakdown, Brian Driscoll. And we're going to talk about the freaks list. Ryan, I kind of thought your intro to the article you wrote today was kind of fitting. You know, it's like, hey, for all you draft nerds and college football fans, like this is kind of this annual rite of passage ever since he started it. And it's the Bruce Feldman freaks list. And Notre Dame had 3 players on the list, which is one more than they had a year ago. The interesting thing is, Ryan, if you actually take last year's list, both of the players from Notre Dame on last year's list are back. So Notre Dame's roster will have 5 Bruce Feldman freaks, and we're going to talk about all of it. We're also going to talk about some guys that we think could maybe be on this list, could have been on this list if they maybe played more, or maybe guys we could see down the road. And we're going to have some fun kind of talking about some of the recruits that we are going to discuss that we kind of think could be on this freaks list down the road. And we'll try to be real specific with it, like just not name like every guy that's a good athlete, but guys that we think have some kind of freakiness to them. And the thing I like about his list, Ryan, it's not all, okay, who are the fastest guys? There's some of that. There's some guys that are just freaky fast. Then there's guys that are like, pound for pound athletic. So a guy runs a 4.2 or a 4.8. How's that freaky? Well, he's 330 pounds. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of fun to look at it. So I enjoy this list, Ryan. I really do. And look, there's things we're going to disagree with, as with everything. But I really respect, and there's things that are like, okay, come on. Well, you and I had a fun conversation about, like, come on, Bruce, that's not accurate, right? Like, that's not what that guy ran. But I love the work that Bruce Feldman puts into this. I really respect, because it takes a lot of time. I mean, he's got guys from like Old Dominion on there. Like, what was the Chattanooga?
Princeton,
right?
Chattanooga.
Like, I mean, he's got kids from like, I think there was a Harvard kid on there. So it's not like he's just calling up the SEC schools, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Michigan, and he's like, hey, guys, who you got? I mean, he's doing work, and I really respect it, and it's a lot of fun. So let's dive into it, Ryan. Bruce Feldman released his freaks list. We're going to talk about Notre Dame players. We'll talk about Notre Dame, kind of some other, opponents that are on there. And then, of course, we'll have some fun with it, kind of some of our opinions about some of the other guys, because, we always have to offer our opinions on things. So, Ryan, first guy on the list. It's not going to surprise a lot of people. Talk about pound for pound athleticism. Cam Hart checked in at number 38 on this list. He was the highest ranked Notre Dame player.
Yeah, and I mean, a couple of the things that because this was kind of validation for me, Brian. I don't know if it felt like that for you, because we've been talking all offseason like, hey, Cam Hart's faster than you think. Cam Hart is a crazy athlete, a stupid athlete, and he shows up as the first Notre Dame player on the list. Bruce wrote that at 6'2.5", 205 pounds. The Maryland native has remarkable tools, broad jumping 11'2" in the broad, 38 inches in the vertical jump, while also hitting 21.7 mile per hour on the GPS during practice. His power clean peak outcome, which I'm actually not sure what that means, 2,490 pounds, is also one of the best on the team. So, Brian, I mean, we're talking 6'2.5", 205 pounds, 11'2" broad is a absolutely ridiculous number. That is, I mean, anytime you're over, I mean, what did Kyle Hamilton had like 10-11 last year, right?
He was a 38-inch vertical, right? Kyle was a 38-inch vertical and a 10-11. And it was longer than what, so Bruce is not, if you track the combine with Bruce's freaks list, the combine isn't normally quite as good as the freaks list, because you're getting this information from coaches and strength coaches and all those type of things. But still, Kyle, we all know that Kyle's an explosive athlete, right? And he had 38 inches, and Bruce said that he was at 41.7 last year, which you and I discussed. Kyle was about 10 pounds heavier in the combine. He's like over 220 at the combine. And so that could kind of factor into it. But, his jumping numbers, explosive numbers were really good for a 6'4", 220-pound guy. He was at 38 inches and I think 10-11 on the broad. So if Cam Hart's in that range, that is really good. The number that stood out to me that kind of was the validation for me was the 21.7 miles per hour on the GPS, which translate at least into the 4.4s for me, and so it backs up kind of what we've seen, that this kid can flat out run. And he's 6'2.5", 205 pounds. So he's not your normal cornerback.
that's the most impressive part of the whole conversation is we're talking about a 6'2 plus corner that is doing those types of things, right? And he also, for verified measurable sake, has over 32-inch arms. So we're talking about height, we're talking about length, we're talking about weight, and we're talking about absolutely incredible speed and explosiveness. I mean, I agree, Brian. Like that number is going to translate, if it is correct, to a 4.4 something athlete at that size, which NFL scouts are going to be salivating over that. But I'm telling you, man, 11.2 broad is a freaky number, man. Like that's the one number what I saw on the list with Cam Hart, and I was like, oh, you could have told me like 10-10 in the broad. I would have been like super pumped about it. 10-11, cool. Anytime you're over 11, that is a stupid number, man. Like that just illustrates the type of athlete that Cam Hart is, which is very good athlete.
Yeah, it was definitely fun to see a Notre Dame cornerback top that list, which was very nice to see. I also want to point out, Ryan, I went with the dark IB shirt today thinking, well, he always wears the light one, and I don't want to be matching today. You literally got it in the mail yesterday, and you're already rocking it.
This is, I will say this is my favorite new IB. This is my favorite IB outfit, ensemble, whatever we call it. The favorite thing that I have, man. It fits great. I mean, you should go to the Irish Breakdown store right now on the site if you haven't gotten any of the merch. I mean,
I actually think
nice.
This color I think they're currently out of. No, it's the gray they're currently out of stock of, which is a bummer. They're going to fill up here soon, but yeah, they're currently out of stock of. But I just had to point that out. I was purposely trying to not match today. But it is a good shirt.
If I could push back on you for a second, we FaceTime earlier, and I was already wearing the shirt, and you chose to put that shirt on.
But I couldn't see your shirt. You FaceTime me like this. I had to look at your whole face. So I know you had the hat on, but I didn't see your shirt. So
I'm just saying I was wearing the shirt first was all I was saying.
Okay. I have mine all stacked up, so I kind of throw it on right before the show starts. So yeah, you got me on that one. Number 2 on the list, Ryan, for Notre Dame was a bit of a surprise for me that they had not that we don't see it, but you talk like Cam wasn't validation for me because we've seen it on the field. This one was a little bit validation for me because we've been talking about him so much this offseason, and he's a bit, I don't say controversial, but there's a lot more debate about it. That's Riley Mills, checked in at number 56, which is pretty high. And for a guy that's 292 pounds, Ryan. So it was, there were some things on there from a strength standpoint that were like, wow, if that's accurate, wow.
I mean, and so like he's a big guy, right? 6'5", 292 pounds. I think we have 293 on the official roster. So he is a humongous man. And I think any picture that you see of him, Brian, like the 420-pound bench press shouldn't shock you too much. I mean, he's obviously spends his time in the weight room. I will say this, though. With the context of the fact that he has long arms, though, 420 is pumping it, man. That's a really good number. The thing that was really interesting for me was in both the hang clean and power clean data that they had. They said that it both bested Isaiah Foskey, and it bested Isaiah Foskey by like a decent margin,
a couple hundred pounds.
Yeah. So when you look at that, you're like, oh, he's explosive too. Like that explosiveness there, and to kind of verify that, I almost fell out of my seat looking at this number. At 292 pounds, he was clocked at 19 miles per hour on the GPS. That is dumb, man. That's really, really fast for 290 something pounds. Like Cam Hart ran 21.7. That's a fantastic number on the GPS tracking. 19 miles per hour for a 290 plus pound athlete. That's more impressive in my opinion. Like that is a silly, silly number. For the people out there that, and I know we've had the question a couple times, like, is Riley athletic enough, explosive enough to play defensive end? The answer by these numbers, if they are all legitimate, the answer is yes. Yes, he is. That is a crazy, crazy number for a player that big.
Because they had last year when Isaiah Foskey was on the list, they had him down as a 20.8 miles per hour, which is freaky fast for a guy that's an edge player, 257. You're adding almost 40 pounds to Riley Mills and getting in the 19s. That, like you said, that's a really impressive number. And the important thing for me, Ryan, it wasn't just the power numbers. Because like you and I both know, I don't care if you're high school football, coaching D3 football, D1 football, NFL, there's going to be guys who are weight room freaks that can't play football or can't move, right? And to see him with those crazy power numbers, but then also clocking into 19 miles per hour, that sort of answered a concern I had this offseason. Like, is Riley going to maintain his twitchiness, his quickness, or not twitchiness, his explosiveness off the ball that we saw in high school at 290 plus pounds? These are off-season numbers. These are from the summer. These are not like numbers from, when he was a freshman before he put a bunch of weight on.
Yes.
So it just is another reason why we're really excited to see Riley Mills this year.
We had a question yesterday or 2 days ago, I forget which one it was, where someone asked the threats of putting too much weight on a frame, right? Like how it can affect him. This is a great, I think, example of the fact that Coach Bayless has watched Riley Mills and kind of had an understanding of what weight can he have on that frame while also still keeping that explosiveness. So we're talking 293 playing defensive end with these types of explosive numbers. Obviously, it has not hindered his explosiveness at all. If anything, it has accentuated it. So I think this is a great example of understanding how much weight you can put on a frame. I think that's what you're seeing right now with a Riley Mills. And man, if you weren't juiced up enough to see what Riley Mills was going to do this year, waking up to him on the freaks list was a pretty awesome surprise. I mean, like you said, Isaiah was what, 45 last year on the list? Some crazy number like that, like in the 40s, I think. Yeah, and it was like seeing that, I'm just like
45.
Wow.
Yeah, 45. They had Kyle Hamilton number 3.
Yeah.
Isaiah Foskey 45 and Chris Tyree 75 were the 3 for last year.
I need to talk to Bruce about our 2 guys not getting back on the list, by the way.
Yeah. I get Tyree because of the injuries. Sure. He didn't produce a whole lot last year. But Foskey not being on it was, especially with some of the dudes we saw like in the 90s, like, dog, you could have bumped that guy off.
100%.
Like, part of me thought like, well, that maybe they try to max it out, which I actually would like if he did this. Like, hey, we're going to go 3 per school, right? And I know it's not a true top 100, but at least it, because otherwise it's not going to have like 8 guys from Bama or
right.
that kind of thing. But there was 2 teams with 4, so you should have at least got Foskey in there. But
100%.
It is what it is. But yeah, there's definitely some guys that are like, yeah, I think Foskey's a little freakier than that too. But it was still, 3's tied for third because you had 2 teams tied for first, so they'd have been the third team. Wisconsin and Michigan. And that's kind of thing is like you look through it and I was like, what? When you got to the top 40, like over 25% of the top 40 were Big Ten guys. I'm like, oh, and he works for Fox. Yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, look, I get it.
Notre Dame is tied for second, okay? Yeah. Wisconsin had a punter on their list. I refuse to count him.
Punter shouldn't have been on there. I'm sorry.
100%. 100%.
Third guy on the list, Ryan, is as I knew when I saw this one, I was like, oh, I can only imagine what Ryan's reaction was. Because Ryan has chosen to die on a couple hills this offseason, and we all do it, right? And sometimes we puff our chests out in victory at the end of the season, and other times like, yeah, I don't remember that. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't remember ever saying that guy was going to be good. But Ryan has been on the Lorenzo Styles hype train all off season and talking about just a guy that's going to break out, have a big time season. We've talked about his polish and his ball skills. He's a high football IQ player, but Lorenzo Styles is not a guy that Ryan thinks is going to be a star this year just because he's a high IQ football player. This is a kid that's got some athleticism, and the numbers that they had on him for the GPS and the explosive numbers and were wow. I was kind of like, okay, yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, this one was the one, Brian, because like you could have told me Riley Mills made the list at some point, and I would have been like, okay, sure. Lorenzo Styles was the one where I was kind of like, wow, I wasn't really expecting that one because like I thought he was a good athlete, of course. I mean, on film. But then you see some of these numbers. And the one thing I love about what Bruce does is he gives you a lot of background information as well. So he started talking about like his dad playing for Super Bowl champion Rams back in the day in the 99-2000 season. And, a little bit of how he finished off the season against Oklahoma State with the 8 catches for 136. So I just really like how researched he is in this kind of conversation. But the numbers that he put out surprised me a good bit. Squatted 510 pounds this offseason. Okay, not crazy. I get it.
For a 195-pound kid, that's really impressive.
Great number. It's a really good number.
Who's a bit long-legged as well, because squat is the equivalent of bench. If you've got long legs, it's a little bit because it's just longer motion that you got to go up and down. Yep. That was impressive.
And he's explosive on film in tight spaces, so I was like, okay, I can see where that explosiveness would come from. Like he's a good squatter. Cool. Broad jumps, 10 foot, 10 inches and a half. So that is nearly an 11-foot broad jump for, again, and I think the context you need to remember, it's only going to be a sophomore this year, right? Like he's still a very young player who's still growing into his body and still getting more explosive. That's a great number. And again, the squat number with the broad jump, I'm like, okay, those things are kind of intertwined. That's where explosiveness comes from, right? I'm like, cool. This one, though, Brian, this is the number that I stood at, and I was like, oh, okay. 22 miles per hour on the GPS, man. Faster than Cam Hart, who we anticipate being a 4.4 type of athlete at 21.7, 22 miles an hour. Yeah. That's moving, man. That is moving. So we have not only explosiveness with the broad and the squat number, he's also pretty fast. Pretty fast player.
Let's get some context, Ryan. Like, we like to put things in context. And Chris Tyree was on that list last year. Chris Tyree, Bruce Feldman said his max speed on the GPS is 22.3 miles per hour. That's Chris Tyree, along with a 4.31 40 and a vertical jump of 40.9 inches. That's what he said about Chris Tyree last year. A 10 and a half broad jump is not quite 40 inches. And when it comes to translating, a 10-10 is, but a 10-10 can be close to a 40-inch vertical jump. So the explosive jumping numbers are similar in the same ballpark, but then you start talking about the miles per hour is right behind Chris Tyree of 22.3 and then 22.0. Those are very close, comparable numbers. So you're talking about if Chris Tyree's a 4.31, that puts Lorenzo Styles at the very least in the low 4.4s, which, again, I don't want to get too ahead of myself and say, 0.3 in the GPS means it probably translates more to high 4.3, Ryan, but at the very least low 4.4s. So when you start seeing that with the strength numbers, you start getting a little excited about what Lorenzo Styles could be this year. If he can just, again, be more forceful, play mature for a sophomore, all those be consistent, those type of things. But there's no doubting the talent.
Yeah, I think the one thing for me is that, I watched him on film last year, and I'm like, that looks like a high 4.4 type of athlete, like 4.47, 4.48, maybe around 4.50. But then you see that number and you're just kind of like, whoa, man, that's like one of those numbers that kind of takes you back a little bit. Because again, Brian, he's only a sophomore, right? He's going to get faster. He's going to get more explosive. So seeing those numbers, it was a great surprise to see Lorenzo Styles, because I thought he was a good to very good athlete. Wasn't expecting to be on the freaks list this year, though. So that was a really cool thing to see, is that now people can kind of be like, oh, wait, Notre Dame does have some speed at wide receiver. I thought they had a bunch of bums, right? They got some dudes. They got some dudes. They'll be all right. They'll be okay.
It just kind of backs up what we've been saying is, I don't know how good Notre Dame is going to be this year, but if they're not good, it won't be because they don't have speed. And that's the whole thing that we've been talking about. You talk about Cam Hart being on the list. You talk about Lorenzo Styles being on the list. Chris Tyree was on the list last year. This team's going to have athleticism and speed. Now, will they be great football players? They play as a team. Will they execute? All those type of things. Yeah, okay, that's a legitimate question that we can answer at some point in time down the road. But there's no debating. There's no debating that there's definitely speed on this football team, and that's what I kind of like. I would honestly rather see that than Foskey, Riley Mills, Jarrett Patterson, the bigger guys, Jason Adamiola. I'm glad that there's receivers and corners on this list, because it kind of backs up some of the stuff that we think and we have heard about this list. So I was very pleased to see that this year.
And they finished, I put it in the article, and it's on irishbreakdown.com if you want to go take a look, but they finished tied for, so they had three schools that they were, they had four different schools that they were tied with three different players on the list. It was Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Cincinnati, and TCU, who always has some stupid freaks on this list. TCU strength program is, they put out some guys over the last few years. But Brian, being in the company of Alabama, Georgia, Clemson on this list, and Cincinnati even, that's a good place to be in too. Just kind of like a quick note that they're up there with the big boys, which is nice to see as far as having the most athletes on the list as well.
Yeah. So as we kind of look at Notre Dame over the last 2 years, you talk about 5 guys coming back from last year's team. And I'm kind of looking at some of these and just kind of seeing, Ohio State last year had Master Teague was their only guy last year. So they've got 2 guys on the list this year, right? So Marvin Harrison and Tyleik Williams, who's a big defensive tackle. Master Teague from their last year's list is gone. So you're talking about over a 2-year stretch, Notre Dame's got 5 guys on there. Ohio State has 2. This is just a Bruce Feldman's list. It's not Ohio State, they're not nearly as athletic as Notre Dame. Not the point. I'm just making the point that this is definitely a team that we're seeing they're more athletic. We knew that, but now they're getting more recognition for being more athletic and more explosive. And that's what makes this really a lot of fun, Ryan. A lot of fun to kind of start thinking about, talking about. And these lists are always a blast, kind of going through them and seeing different guys on there. Like, oh, they got so-and-so ahead of that guy. And, it's a lot of fun to go through these lists. And there were repeats from last year too. So again, I'm going to push back on the fact that they didn't have Isaiah Foskey on this list.
I know. I was kind of surprised that they didn't have Zach Harrison, the most athletic defensive end that's ever
and he wasn't on the list last year. I don't think he wasn't
right? After running like 10-8 and 100 or whatever that was.
I'm just telling you, I'm looking at the list now, and I hit search for Ohio State, hit Control F Ohio State, and there's only one. Master Teague was at 19.
It's interesting,
which I kind of thought was strange. They said he ran a 4.35 in the 40. Do you remember what Master Teague did at the combine? Wasn't he injured a lot last year?
I don't think he was invited to the combine.
For pro day then.
Correctly. He was like 4.3 something, 4.35 or something.
So that tracks, because I like those things. I like kind of looking at, okay, how did a guy do? Yeah, Master Teague, they had him as a 4.44 is the official time. So and he also, as I said, he was banged up a lot last year too. He wasn't healthy last year.
Yep.
So because that's why he wasn't the player he was the year before, and so that was an interesting one. But yeah, he's really I'm a big Master Teague fan. Like in the last couple of years, just as a person, he's a kid that I've really come to respect a great deal. So hope he does well in the NFL, can stay healthy. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how this continues to project moving forward. But it was fun to kind of look at this list and be like, okay, this is fun to watch. Ryan, did you have some thoughts on, like, obviously you had some opponent stuff on there, just kind of looking through the list you sent me. Clemson had 3 guys, so they were the highest of Notre Dame's opponents. And so you had, and they had some guys that were ranked high. Like I think they had, I believe all 3 of their guys were ranked ahead of Notre Dame's guys. I believe
they were. I think they were all in the top 30 if I remember correctly.
Because you had Miles Murphy was number 3 overall. And they had him down, just like kind of for comparison's sake, they had him down at 6'5", 275. And his deadlifts were 505, power clean 335, vertical jump of 35 inches, and said clocked in the high 4.5s according to the Clemson coaches. I think Miles Murphy's a freaky player, but I'd be a little surprised if he's a 4.5. But he's a pretty athletic dude. He's a pretty explosive dude. They had Brian Breezy at 14.
That's what I was going to say is Brian Breezy at 6'5", 310. They had him in the 4.7s in the 40-yard dash. Like, whoa, man.
But they only had him as a 30-inch vertical. And those two things just don't really track really well with me. Although it can be difficult with 300-pounders because I think Jordan Davis had a sub 30 vertical jump last year, correct? At the combine.
I think he snuck into the 30s. I could be wrong.
I'm trying to find his numbers now. See his 32. Yeah, I thought it was 28 for some reason. So 32. And he ran a 4.78. So with 300-pounders, it can get a little bit tricky. It doesn't quite translate. If you told me an athlete ran a 4.7 and he was a receiver and he had a 30-inch vertical, he's not 4.7. He's slower than that. Big guys are a little bit different. And then the third guy on the list was Trenton Simpson, who was 29th. They have him down 6'3", 240 with a 10.2 broad jump, vertical jump of 35 inches. And they say he ran in the high 4.3s, which includes a 10-yard split under 1.5. I'm not impressed by the 10-yard split under 1.5. Notre Dame has a freshman tight end who did better than that 2 months after he had his ACL surgery. So I'm going to eventually let that go. I'm going to eventually let it go, I swear. But he's another kid. That kid on film is explosive. Like, I don't know if he's a 4.3 or not. I don't really care. All I know is when that dude's on the field, he moves. He moves.
I've heard other people tell me 4.4 flat to 4.43-ish. So like I believe it, man. Actually, he plays that Isaiah Simmons role. And honestly, Trenton Simpson, is a better football player than Isaiah Simmons was coming out of Clemson. Isaiah Simmons was probably a little freakier, but Simpson is a incredible player. He's a really talented kid. He plays that overhang role, though. Yeah.
I would say my only pushback on that would be I would say Trenton Simpson's a more natural linebacker.
Oh, 100%.
I think Isaiah Simmons was a better football player because you could do so much with him. And he was so incredibly productive. I mean, at his size, 6'4", 230, he was playing safety half the time.
And he ran in the 4.3s.
Yeah, it was
just insane,
like you said,
yeah.
he was freaky athletically. But look, again, their front seven, we've been saying it all offseason. We think they're going to have the best front seven in college football this year. Because, I mean, Tyler Davis, I believe KJ Henry is still on their team, correct? And he is. If it wasn't for Murphy and Bracey, people would be talking a lot more about Tyler Davis and KJ Henry. I mean, those are good football players. So it's going to be fun to watch.
Xavier Thomas is a depth player at this
He's supposed
point,
to. Exactly.
Yeah.
I really hope he's healthy and gets back to kind of where he was. He's a good football player. He had
a good game last year. It was like one of the last games of the season. I was like, oh, that actually looks kind of like the old Xavier Thomas a little bit. I like it. Yeah.
I hope he gets back. He was always a little like you say he's overrated. He shouldn't have been like the number one player in the country, but he's a really good football player. And I always like I don't ever like seeing guys not pan out because they have injuries. Yeah, that's never fun.
Yeah.
Some other guys on the list. Ohio State was next on the list. They had two guys, as we mentioned. Marvin Harrison Jr. was number 2 on the list. By the way, for those that are unsure, Lorenzo Styles is not Lorenzo Styles Jr. So I just want to point that out to people. He is not Lorenzo Styles Jr. His mom made sure to let me know that. So he is not Lorenzo Styles Jr. Bruce Feldman correctly had that written down. But Marvin Harrison is Marvin Harrison Jr. And he was on there, checked in at 6'3", 206, did 22 reps on the bench for a receiver. I'm gonna have to see that one. 3.94 shuttle time is moving. Period. Much less for a 6'3" guy.
I talked to a former scout on that one earlier, Brian, and he said that would be the fastest that he's ever seen for a 6'3" plus wide receiver. Like just a ridiculous number.
3.9 is incredibly quick. The shuttle is the one where you start in the middle, you run 5 yards. So you start in the middle, there's a cone to you 5 yards to your left, a cone 5 yards to your right. So you start in you one run direction, you touch that cone, then you go all the way back to the other cone. So it's like 5, 10, 5. And you get it. Like if you're 6'3" and you run like a 4.2, a 4.1, you're moving. You're pretty quick. You start getting into like 3.94, that is really, really good.
Yes.
So he had exceptional numbers, and I'm trying to look. I'm going to pull up Kevin Austin's numbers because Kevin Austin had one of the best pro shuttles last year in the combine. Kevin Austin was a 4.15, which was really good. I think he ranked as one of the. I'm trying to find it, but he was one of the. I'm to look at the combine results around, but he had one of the very best pro shuttle numbers at the combine amongst the receivers at a 4.15. And similar body types, although Marvin's a little longer than Kevin Austin is. And usually the taller you are, the because it's quick feet, right? I mean, you're a longer guy, you like the long strides, things like that. It can be a little bit problematic. And then they said he topped out at 23 miles an hour on the GPS.
I'll believe that when I see it. Like that's because honestly, like and again, sometimes guys aren't great 40-yard dash runners if they play fast. And I do think Marvin Harrison plays fast, junior, but
he's not running a 4.2 something in the.
Yeah, that's like a 4.2 type of athlete. Like that's insane. Right. Yeah.
But he is fast. He can run.
Yes, he's fast. He is fast. Sure.
He can run. And then the other guy they had was Tariq Williams, who checked in at number 66. He's a defensive tackle. He's a big kid. They said he's down from 350 to 315, and had a 10-yard split of 1.62. He said he's in the past that let me see here what they said about him. They mentioned Zach Harrison, who they had down as a 10.7 meter. He says, but Williams is the one to keep an eye on. So they didn't actually give any numbers for him. They just said he's except for the 1.62 10-yard split. So that's a little bit of a curious one to kind of look at.
Yeah.
But then you had some individual players. Your team, Elijah Higgins was very high on the wrist. That's a guy you and I have talked about this offseason, Ryan, for Stanford, who's like a 6'4", 230-pound wide receiver. And actually, in here, he lists him at 6'3", 240.
He was 240 this spring. Yeah.
And he said that he's topped out at 21.5 miles per hour on a 56-yard touchdown catch and run last year. So that sounds like he's healthy.
If that is true, then that's bonkers, man.
Yeah.
Like that's someone's going to look at him as a tight end, like a move tight end, and be like, "Yup, you're the guy, man." Yeah. Like, can you imagine linebackers trying to run with a guy that can run that fast? Like, that's insane. Absolutely insane.
Yep. And then we had USC had Andrew Voorhees, was in the 90s. Okay. And then Syracuse had a fullback, Chris Elmore, which I'm like, come on, man. You got that 290-pound fullback on there over Isaiah Foskey. Like, that's one of those ones where I was like, come on, dude.
They should have at least Syracuse should have at least like done like Sean Tucker with like his something track like background or something.
Yeah, this guy was number 100. They had him down for benching 410 pounds, squatting 620 pounds, and hang cleaning 310. Like, nothing about how he runs. He's 6 foot 291. You're 6 foot 291. You're gonna have short arms. You should be able to bench 410 pounds. Like, come on, you're 6 foot 290 pound fullback. If you can't bench at least 400 pounds, why are you on scholarship? I don't understand. So there were some like that I looked at. I was like, come on, man, come on, Bruce, you're reaching here. And then I think that was it. So just one guy for USC. None of the receivers or any of those guys made the freaks list this year. I'm actually curious if they had any guys last year that might be coming back. So who were the guys that USC had last year? Drake London was on it at number 60. That was it. So wow. Yeah, he ended up having a pretty good year. So until he got hurt, he was a pretty good player.
Yep.
So that's the list of players. They had Ike Ekwonu on there last year. So that was he ended up having a breakout year. How many guys? I know Cincinnati had several guys on there. I know Myjai Sanders was on there. Desmond Ritter was on there. You have to think that Sauce was on there, right? Alec Pierce was on there. Nope. Myjai Sanders was 20. Alec Pierce was 46. This is the one I wanted to see. He jumped 11 feet, vertical jumped. He broad jumped 11 feet, vertical jumped 40 inches, and ran a 4.45 in the 40 and a 4.14 in the shuttle. So he actually improved upon his numbers at the combine. Because didn't he run like a 4.41, I think?
4.41-ish, yeah, something like that.
So, and his vertical was really impressive. So he was the other guy. And then the third was Desmond Ritter,
who tested well. He ran like 4.5 something at the combine.
Yeah, and they had him here as 4.55. So I like seeing those translations. And the reason I point that out is because, like we joke, like there's sometimes you're like, that guy ran a lot faster in college than he ran at the combine. But the more you see these things kind of translate, the better. And that's the encouraging thing. Because then maybe Chris Tyree is a 4.31. Maybe Lorenzo is running 22 miles an hour on the GPS.
What that tells you is what schools you can trust and what schools you can't.
That's right.
That's what that tells you. 100%.
That's right.
100%.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's the list. Ryan, let's just go ahead.
Ryan, before we end it, can we?
We're not ending it. All right. I wanted to talk about just some other thoughts from the list.
Okay. I'm sorry. I ruined your transition then. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's all good because I know how excited you are talking about. I was not going to be dirty and not let you talk about it. Let's talk about some other guys and some other thoughts and observations we had on the list. I know you had some really strong opinions on the Michigan should be really good this year because they are Ohio State's in trouble, man, with all these freaky athletes that Michigan has. Boy, I tell you what, Ohio State, they might be in trouble this year against Michigan. I said sarcastically. They had Mozzie Smith number 1. Now, for Notre Dame fans, that's a guy they remember because Notre Dame recruited Mozzie Smith. And there was a time when it looked like Notre Dame might have a shot to get him, ended up going to Michigan. But some of the stuff they had there on him was just like dumb.
Yes.
Like them hopping up the steps and it's just like, come on, man.
Yeah. I'm not even going to repeat too much of the other testing for him, Brian. I mean, it's all pretty ridiculous. The number that I wanted to really hone in on and dissect for a second. Okay. So first of all, Mazzy Smith, 6'3", listed at 337 pounds. So he's a big boy, number 58 if you haven't watched him on film. The number that was thrown out there for his vertical jump was 44 inches. I'm going to say this again. His vertical jump was 44 inches.
But he only broad jumped 9.4 and a half.
Yes. I don't even want to.
It might have been a miss. I mean, honestly, it might have been a miss, right? Like they meant to write 34 and they misread it,
Like 34 would be a great number for 337 pounds. 44, that's the greatest athlete of all time. Mazzy Smith, if those numbers are real, is going top 20 in the draft next year.
and ran a 6.95 in the 3-cone drill.
Which is pretty good.
Which is really good. Really good.
Yeah.
So you just kind of look like I'm going to look at the NFL draft last year, the NFL combine, and that would have tied him, see here, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th at the combine last year with Jack Cohn. Kyle Hamilton ran a 6.9 flat.
Yes.
Like, you got corner, safety, receiver. Kyle Hamilton or Kevin Austin was 5th. with a 6'7" Aiden Hutchinson 6'7" safety, quarterback, safety, defensive end Trayvon Walker 6'8" So you're telling me Trayvon Walker is barely quicker than Mozzie Smith? So yeah, I had some interesting thoughts on that one. Yeah,
that's what the freak list will have us believe.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Now they did have so I'll play kind of like devil's advocate a little bit. His number 2 guy on the list last year was Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah.
And he had a monster year and went out and did some really good things last year for them. So, maybe he's there, maybe he's ready for the breakout, but his combine numbers didn't quite live up to sort of what Bruce had last year. So like Bruce had Aiden running in the low 4.6s with a mid 30 vertical. The mid 30 vertical is accurate. He had 36-inch vertical, but the low 4.6s, he ran a 4.74 at the combine.
Yep.
And did not do bench, which most kids didn't. He had him down as in the 3-cone he said he had the second best 3-cone on the team at 6.37. Quiddy Pay did. He said this offseason, Hutchinson was second best with 6.54. He ran a 6.73 at the combine, which is really good.
Which is still really good, but
really good for a kid that big.
They made that number a little bit mythical.
Yes. And that's kind of my point is the thing that, I guess the thing that is, if they're pumping him up, like you don't need to. Like Aiden Hutchinson last year had, I think, the 5th best shuttle, 6th best 3-cone time at 6.73. The guys ahead of him were Kevin Austin, Calvin Austin, Tyson Anderson from Toledo, who had great times, Dax Hill from Michigan, and Zion McCullum, corner, safety, receiver. And then after Aiden Hutchinson, it's safety, quarterback, safety, and then a D-end who went number 1 overall because of his freaky combine numbers, then safety, linebacker, quarterback, receiver, safety, right? So you're just not seeing defensive ends in there other than the number 1 and 2 picks last year. So, but it was off. It was off quite a bit from where he actually was at the combine when he spent several months training to be as fast as he possibly could be.
Right.
So, I just, some of that stuff you look at and say, okay, I think they're pumping that up a little bit, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, honestly, I put this on a podcast earlier, actually, Brian. So I said that if Mazzy Smith verticals 44 inches next year, I will delete my Twitter.
Okay.
I'll leave it out there, man. I'm going to leave it out there. It's mythical. Okay. I'm sorry. At some point, physics come into effect, right? And 337 pounds is not going to vertical 44 inches. I'm sorry. That you're telling me that, because I'm pretty sure the combine record is like 46.5. And you're telling me that 44 a defensive tackle is going to do. That's what you're saying.
300+ pound defensive tackle is going to do.
Yes. 330 plus pound. Like,
that would be 2 inches higher than anybody at the combine last year.
Yep.
Highest at the combine last year was 42 by Channing Tindall, who's a linebacker, and Tariq Woolen.
I'm pretty sure the combine record is like Gerald Sensabaugh at like 46.5 or something.
Let's go D tackles. The highest D tackle last year was 33.
Yep.
So yeah. It's I mean, and those guys are really good athletes. I mean, Jordan Davis is 32 inches at his weight was absurd.
It is absurd.
Absurd. And you're telling me he's a whole foot higher? Like 12 inches is still a foot, right? I'm pretty sure, right?
Yes.
So he can jump a full foot higher than Jordan Davis. They're not that far off in weight for what Jordan Davis was at the combine last year.
Here's another one. Different position, but another 320+ pounder. Tristan Worfs, when he came out of Iowa, he had the offensive line record. I think it was 36 or 36.5 inches. Insane number.
Right.
Like, didn't make any sense. You're telling me that he can jump, what's that?
7.5 inches higher, right?
No, more than that. More than that.
So 44 would be 6. Yeah, it'd be 10. Yeah, 9.5.
Yeah. So you're telling me that he can go almost a foot higher than Tristan Worfs did as the highest ever of an offensive lineman. I just nah. And then also, man, Michigan's got some dudes again, man. Julian Westhoff, who's been a special teamer during the course of his career, but he's going to blow up this year, man. Christian Turner, and then I forget who else was on there, but I was just like, all right, cool.
Who was their fourth guy? I can't remember who it was.
I don't even remember.
Let's look it up.
I was expecting one of their wide receivers to be on there, but they didn't. I thought it was going to be like the the Andrell Anthony or something, but he
Kenneth Grant. They're going to have the most athletic defensive tackle tandem in the country, apparently.
Yes.
Because he is at 6'4", 360. Good. I will say this: they're going to be big.
Yes.
Kenneth Grant is 6'4", 360. He ran a sub-5 flat, and the funny thing is, all these numbers are coming from Jim Harbaugh, which even adds more. Like, okay, sure, if you say so.
Sub-5 at 360 is dumb.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't make any sense either. That's
Which is kind of what Jordan Davis did last year, which everybody was like, yeah, that's a little nuts. Now, Weshoff was on the list last year at 33. So he's now made it 2 years in a row. Has he actually done anything as a football player?
He had a half a tackle for loss last year.
Okay. All right. As we said, sometimes you get guys who are freaky athletes and weight room guys, but they're just not football players.
Yes.
And he's a senior. Boy, it doesn't seem like he'll be a fifth-year senior.
He's a 25-year-old kid too, right?
Yeah. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago that they landed him, to be completely honest with you. And yeah, they didn't have they didn't have Dax Hill on the list last year. That's an oversight. He was always a freaky athlete. So even in high school, he was a 5-star kid. So it was an interesting list, very, very interesting list. They had Brock Bowers on there, which I thought was interesting. They kind of talked about Eric Gilbert and all those kind of guys. They said Brock. Trying to see here. Word is Bowers, whose mom was an All-American softball player, ran a 4.49. That's moving for a tight end.
That is really
moving.
Yep.
That's really moving. I'm going to see something real quick. Who did Georgia have on this list last year? They had Devonte Wyatt.
Who's a freak?
Yep.
Good
and
call.
Because I want to see how close, because this is what I do every year, and I haven't had a chance to do it yet. So you guys are kind of seeing what I see normally, because you talk about who is accurate, like who is on point. So in this thing last year, they said his most impressive testing number is the 4.87. This is Devonte Wyatt, the 4.87 40 he clocked this offseason. He also vertical jumped 31 inches and had a broad jump of 9.3. They were pretty close. Actually, he ran a 4.77 at the combine last year. So he actually got faster. His vertical was 29.31. That's just a good day, bad day. And then his broad jump was 111, which is tracks with what they provided last year.
Yep.
So you'd say, at least with him, they were pretty accurate with Devonte Wyatt. So I'm trying to see who else they might have had on the Georgia. Did Georgia only have one guy on the list last year? Seriously? Georgia Southern had more guys on the freaks list last year than Georgia did. Okay.
How was Trayvon Walker not on that list?
They had James Skalski on that list last year? Okay. Hold on a second. They had Braxton Burmeister on the list. See, I didn't even go through them last year. I just kind of looked at the Notre Dame guys, or top guys, apparently.
That's now San Diego State great, Braxton Burmeister.
He's been riding the Andy Vujnovic train for a while. He was also on the list last year.
Who is that? I don't know who that is.
Punter from Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah. I skipped over him.
Who's that guy? Yeah, so
that was my biggest takeaway, is that Wisconsin's going to be really good this year too. They tied for the most on the freaks list.
Yeah,
tied for the most.
Northwestern had a defensive end on there, which I thought was interesting. But I'm just kind of going through this list. Just some different guys that like Notre Dame recruited. It's kind of fun to see kind of how these guys have panned out athletically. Rodney Moss, what kind of player is he? He's pretty good, right? If I remember correctly.
He I don't think he plays
top 20.
He's going to test really well. I don't think he plays quite as fast as but he's really instinctive, really smart, good ball skills. Like everything is there from that technical perspective. But I do know he was like a crazy 110 high hurdler in high school, like 13 something. Like he can scoot, man.
You were talking yesterday. We got asked a question about the most overrated and underrated players in the country. And one of the underrated players you talked about was Will McDonald, the defensive end from Iowa State. He checked in at number 5 on this list today. So this came out today. So Ryan didn't have a advanced. Bruce isn't sending Ryan an advanced copy of his freaks list. He came in at number 12, as you had mentioned yesterday, how good of a season he had last year, 14 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks. They talked about his vertical jump is 42 to 43 inches, and he should broad jump around 11 feet.
So he was, a little background on him, he was like a 6'6" high jumper in high school. So that probably checks out, man. He's an explosive dude. Yeah.
It's been around for a little bit too. Kid's definitely been around for a little bit. They had Keely Ringo. So I wanted to bring this one up for context. because I thought this would kind of show people. He is the number 6 player in this list. Bruce Feldman said, now the size in which Keely Ringo puts up these numbers is freaky,
Yes.
right? But I just want to put the numbers in context. He said a world-class junior sprinter from Arizona who ran a 10.4 300 and a 21.18 200-meter time is a legitimate 4.3 40 guy who consistently clocks in the high 22 mile per hour range in the GPS. I just want to point out that Micah Bell's 100-meter time and 200-meter time are both better than that as a junior. So just to put Micah Bell's speed into context, because those numbers that they put up are, I don't care what size you are, that's moving.
Yes.
And what makes Keely a potential to me in the conversation for best corner in the country is he's a good football player, but he's huge. And that's what's interesting about him and Cam Hart are the two really unique, like kind of unicorn corners this year in that they can run, but they're both tall and long. But just kind of putting Micah Bell's numbers into context there, he's faster in high school than the number. And I had read somewhere, and I don't know how true this is because now we're talking about high school kids, but somebody put a tweet out saying that Dylan Edwards, we'll get to the Notre Dame kids, more a little bit, but I'm kind of throwing a little teaser out there, has been clocked as high as 23 miles per hour on the GPS. I don't know if I buy that, but that's part of me wonders maybe it's true because he's got so many long touchdown runs.
Yeah,
maybe. But even if you're off by a 1 mile per hour, that's moving. Yeah, that's really, really moving. Any others that kind of stood out to you, Ryan, that you wanted to kind of discuss or talk about?
I was going to say, for a little more context on that mile per hour for a second, I'm pretty sure I've heard that Usain Bolt clocks at like 25 point something miles per hour. Gosh. So like 23 is like, that's moving, man. Like that 22 is moving. 21, that is moving. So yeah, I mean, for me, Brian, it was just, we saw a lot of Big Ten players. So I guess the speed is coming from the Big Ten this year.
I'm sure it has nothing to do with the guy that wrote the list works for Fox, which has the Big Ten contract. I'm sure it has nothing to do with that.
Yes. Oh, here's a good one, though. I don't know. I'm sure you remember him because he was a big-time recruit. Do you remember Zach Koontz?
That went to Penn State? Tight end. Was it Penn State? Yeah.
Yep. So he transferred to Old Dominion, had 73 receptions last year for Old Dominion, good football player. So he is 6'8.5", 251 pounds with 35-inch arms, has 10-plus inch hands, and he supposedly has run a 4.57 this offseason, a 40-inch vert, and a 10.8 broad jump, man. That is, if he does that, then, man, how high can he go? I mean, that's first-round level numbers. Now, he's had injuries. He's played at Old Dominion. Like, I get that, but, like, that's like historical numbers. That is just crazy numbers for that size.
Yeah. He was a kid that I liked coming out, but he was always a guy that was a bit more twitchy, like vertically, than he was like movement stuff.
Sure.
So I'm not surprised he ran a 4.57. He was a tall, long, fast kid. Arian Smith was on there, which is really interesting. And they've got Arian Smith Jr. numbers in track because Arian Smith is an Olympic caliber sprinter. And he ran a 10.3 flat was his best time in the 100-meter dash in high school, and that's really moving. Most of his numbers were very similar to Micah Bell's. He ran a 10.3, but his senior year, he ran 10.65, 10.49, 10.45, 10.39, 10.52, 10.66, 10.4 flat, 10.69, 10.64. So very similar to what Micah Bell is, except he had that one time that was like a little bit better. Micah Bell's was 10.41 as a junior. I don't know where the 10.3 actually his best time, that 10.3 was what he did in college. His best high school time in the 100-meter dash was a 10.4 flat. So Arian Smith's a world track. His best 200-meter time is 21.46. No, I'm sorry, 21.1.29. Micah Bell's is 20.89. And Arian Smith is a freak. So I'm just kind of going on here and pointing out some of these guys that are known as burners. I love this kid right here from Harvard. Great name. Thor Griffith. I've actually seen him play a little bit, because of watching him when watching some of his Chris Smith's film, but he's got a great name. Here was the most absurd numbers they had on there. Tyler Harrell from Alabama. So he had a 10-yard split of it, supposedly, according to Scott Satterfield, a 10-yard split of a 1.41. and they had him on the stopwatch at 419, and he did a laser at 424. Now, I'm kind of calling a little bit BS. They said he's 24 miles an hour on the GPS. He says at U of L he was consistently hitting 24 miles per hour on GPS. Now, we could sit here and have some fun about, I don't know if he's really that or whatever. But the fact is, even if all of those numbers are inflated, he's freaking fast. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And they said the same thing last year. So I think they're basically just going off of the numbers that they gave him last year. Because when he was on this list, he was on the list of 11 last year. He's on 43 this year. But they just repeated his numbers. 419 in the 40, laser 424, 10-yard split of 141, and he's hit 24 miles an hour on the list. So basically, it's still using the same times from a year ago to get him on the list. There's only one Alabama kid on the list, which leads me to believe that Alabama wasn't overly cooperative with Bruce Feldman getting him numbers. Is going to be my guess. Would you say that might be inaccurate?
It's fair, man. It's fair.
I got to think like Dallas Turner or Will like somebody's going to be on this list. So
you would think. I mean, with how they recruit,
All they had was Chris Braswell, was the only guy on this list for this year, who was the linebacker that they had. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, Tyler Harrell, you just said, was on the list, right?
Yes, but they're using his Louisville numbers.
Okay,
that's what I'm saying. Like they used his numbers, and they quoted Coach Scott Satterfield in the article.
Gotcha.
So they were using the stuff from Louisville to have him on the list. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But any other ones? I thought there was a pair of twins from Illinois on the list, which I thought was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, with the low body fat or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly.
I was actually watching. It was like a Big Ten media round thing or whatever. I forget what it was, but they visited the Illinois practice, and that kid Chase Brown, the running back, because his brother Sydney is the safety. Chase Brown looks like a little tank, man. I was like, whoa, brother. That guy is impressive looking. Yeah. Another guy that I saw, Brian, that I know about him, but I didn't know enough about him, was Gabe Hall that plays at Baylor. He came in at like 17 on the list. So 6'6", 295 pounds. So he's a big kid. They play a 3-4. He's a 3-4 defensive end for them. Bench press, 500 pounds. Power cleans, 465. He did 750 on the deadlift and 650 on the squat. And it said in there that the BYU strength staff had to stop him at 750 and 650. He's like, you're good. We don't need to do any more than that. Right. And also at 295, 18.2 miles per hour on the GPS. So guy can move on top of being a workout warrior, man. Like
you said, how big was he?
6'6", 295.
And you said he was at what miles per hour?
18.2.
Just to point out that they had Riley Mills down to 19.3.
Yep.
So at 3 pounds lighter. There was one more Notre Dame opponent on the list we didn't talk about, and that was Rasheem Ali, the running back for Marshall, who they said 30 seconds vertical, broad jump at 10, very strong kid, good running back. It's a good running back. He's a good football player. He's one of the better running backs Notre Dame is going to face this year. Good football player. More of a bigger kid, like a one-cut, good vision. I don't see big-time speed on film, but you do see the strength. And all the stuff they pointed out was jumping and power numbers. They didn't point out like his vertical and all that. That tracks because he's a pretty strong kid. He runs hard.
Yeah.
He runs hard.
Explosiveness and power out of him. Yeah, I agree.
So let's have some fun looking at Notre Dame's current roster, current recruiting class, the 2023 recruiting class. And because I do think there's a couple guys on here that in the 23 class that I think we're going to see on Bruce Feldman's list down the road, barring injury. And the first two that pop off kind of for me are guys we've talked about. There's a couple more that I want to bring up too, and that's Micah Bell and Dylan Edwards.
Yes,
I think they're both going to have really crazy GPS numbers. And then if he's going back to high school track times, he's going to look at Micah Bell's track times and be like, okay, this kid is moving.
I'll be surprised if Micah Bell's not on in the future. Just with the track numbers alone, but then on top of the GPS tracking stuff, the dude's going to move, right? That's an easy one. I mean, honestly, you know who else? I mean, we can't leave out Peyton Bowen, I think, is another guy that could definitely be on that list someday. I mean, he's a young man that we've also heard has run in the 4.3s, and he's going to be a little bit of a bigger guy comparative to both of those players too. So he's probably going to be 190 something, maybe 200 pounds at some point, and he's explosive on film too. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's vertical and in broad jump really good numbers too. So
you see it on film,
lightweight speed guy. Yeah.
The jumping, the explosiveness, those things don't surprise me if you look at where he is on film.
No.
I think a couple other guys that I would say I'm very curious to see how they pan out. Obviously, Keon Keeley is a guy that I think is going to have some really crazy, twitchy numbers at the next level. I think another guy that maybe people might not think, but Drake Bowen is an extremely athletic football player.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see him because they do a lot of pound for pound type of stuff, and Drake actually put some out on Twitter the other day where he kind of took his scale, Brian, and they had him down at 231.
That's crazy.
Yeah, which is really a good size for him. So, and he's going to run fast and he moves well and the explosiveness will all be there. So I think he's another guy that could be on this list. What about and I think too, there's some freshmen. I think, anyone else from the 2023 class that you kind of look at? Like
I would throw out Charles Jagasaw as another one. I think because he's going to be a massive kid for one, right? Like he's going to be 6'6" plus 320 plus pounds when he's in kind of the prime of his career at Notre Dame. And I would not be shocked if he is just going to be a weight room monster, right? Like squatting a ton, deadlifting a ton. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like a sub 5 second 40-yard dash guy at some point because he's explosive. Like, so he would be my guy of all the linemen outside of like Keon that I would say him. And then the only other one I actually mentioned a little bit in the mailbag is I think if we list Brendan Vernon as an interior defensive lineman, I wouldn't be shocked if that's there someday, because like his numbers working inside, I think could be really impressive.
What about the freshman class? I won't be shocked to see Jalen Sneed on this list someday down the road, or Nolan Ziegler. I think those two kids are really crazy athletic. Like I really could see both of those two guys on this list at some point in time down the road. And another guy that I think we'll see on the list at some point down the road too, according to some of the sources I have at Notre Dame, before his injury, Jadarian Price was putting up crazy GPS numbers. Yeah, like his explosiveness was like, we kept saying he's got a different gear. And I'm like, now keep in mind, Chris Tyree didn't practice for much of the spring. So it's not comparing him to Chris Tyree. He had a sprained ankle all spring. They're talking about he's got a different gear from everybody else we had. And if Lorenzo Styles is on this list and they're saying that Jadarian Price has a different gear than anybody else they have on offense that was there in the spring, that's saying something. I think Jadarian Price is another guy that I think could be could be on this list. And then the final one, I really think if he can put the weight on and maintain his athleticism, Emilia Wagner. Because Emil is a really powerful, like his strength numbers are going to be insane. And he's really athletic. So I could see him being a 35-inch vertical. These are just guesses on what we see on film. I could see him being a 35-inch vertical guy at 290 plus. I could see him, having pretty good GPS times for a big guy, although it'll be harder to measure that because linemen just don't run long sprints enough to where you can really measure that. Right. And because the GPS stuff is you're not having a guy run 40-yard dash and then also measuring his GPS. The GPS numbers come from actual practice in game. So like they have the monitors on as like their equipment and they monitor their GPS. And that's how you measure it. So like that's why you see a lot of receivers and running backs because it's when you get those long, straight line runs where you see the numbers. Receivers running post routes and go routes once they hit that that straightaway kind of thing. So that's why you see it more from them than you see it from some of the other guys. But like they had one for Riley Mills, they had one for Isaiah Foskey last year, so you'll still see it from some of those guys. But he's a guy to me that I think could be on that. Emilia Wagner, if he can maintain the athleticism he has now as he gains weight, could be a guy. And then, I mean, we joke about the 10-yard split time, but in all seriousness, it won't shock me to see Eli Raridan on this list down the road either.
He's going to be a massive kid.
We have fun with the 10-yard split thing. That's just more of just the absurdity of that particular time. But the one thing is we're not making fun of him because he's not athletic or explosive. He is a freaky athlete. Yes. It's just that 10-yard split time's a little bit absurd. But he'll be on that list, I think. Because the other thing he's a good football player. Yes. And so he'll get that recognition as well because he's a good football player. He's a guy that I can see on that list as well.
Yeah. That's another key point is that for the most part, there's always like a guy that doesn't really fit into the criteria, but like a lot of good football players on that list, right? Like that's kind of where you get that notoriety from and that name recognition. A sleeper for you in the freshman class, Tyson Ford. Okay. Would be one that I would throw out as a sleeper because I would guess as he continues to get bigger, I think he's going to be an interior guy long-term, right? Because he's already 270 something.
Yeah. Or if he stays at end, he's going to look a lot more like Riley Mills than he did Khalid Kareem.
Sure.
size-wise. Right?
Yeah, I think the point that I was trying to make is that like he's going to be 290 pounds.
Right, and that's what I was trying to kind of get to. It's not so much the position, but he's going to be a 200. He's already 275.
And he moves really like he's a really good change of direction guy. So I can imagine him having just like a stupid 3-cone for a guy his size, like just a different, a crazy number for that in that department.
Yeah, there's some young guys on this roster and in the upcoming recruiting class that are different type of dudes athletically. There really are. And I'm looking forward to seeing how they progress. It's gonna I'm looking forward to the day when we see these lists like, 4 Notre Dame guys. Oh, they don't have this guy, they don't have that guy, like
I mean that kind of happened on this one though. We're like, oh, what happened to the 2 guys from last year?
Right, but at least they were on there last year. At least they were on there last year though. That's my thing. But and then of course Chris Tyree, which we didn't talk about, was on a lot, but he was on that list. He's one of the more explosive running backs in the country, and more explosive players in the country. And just the hope is, fingers crossed that he can stay healthy, because now you're talking about you have multiple guys. And look, I'm another guy on the current roster that I think we could see on there is Tyler Buckner.
Yeah, that's good.
Just because how often do you have quarterbacks that are going to be low 4.6, high 4.5 guys that are going to have some of those things? So I'd be curious to see what his testing numbers are next year once he gets another year under his belt in the weight room. I think he's a guy that could potentially be on there.
They didn't really have any quarterbacks on the list, did they?
No, they haven't. No, they had one last year.
Yeah,
but I don't see any this year. I was looking through the list, so they see. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Can't think of any. Oh, Anthony Richardson is the only quarterback on the list.
Yeah, well, he deserves to be on that list. He is a freaky athlete. Yeah.
They said he's 6'4", 238. He's run a 4.4 flat and can throw a football 75 yards. Richardson cleans 325 pounds and squatted 500 this offseason.
Okay. I mean, if he's 238 and ran 4.4 flat, then sure, you should be on the list. Absolutely.
Yeah. 10% body fat. Yeah, that's. Yeah.
I did just see a video of him just kind of moving around and stuff, and dude is a freak, man.
He's a freaky athlete. Close, it's just the stuff about him being a high draft pick. It's like, can we let him look competent as a passer first?
Let him play. Yeah, exactly.
Because when he was on the field last year as a quarterback, the athletic part, tracks. It tracks. Mm-hmm. But he's got kid threw 6 touchdowns and 5 interceptions last year, and it was his second year on campus?
Yes.
He's thrown, let's see, in his career so far, he's thrown there we go. It's loading a little bit slow, but he's thrown, what did he throw, 85 passes last year, Ryan?
Something like that. Yeah.
Okay, this dumb website just froze up on me. But and he threw 6 in 2020.
Yeah.
So he's thrown 6 interceptions in less than 100 passes in his career.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my whole thing is he may end up being a star, but let's pump the brakes a little bit on that. I'm sorry. I was wrong. He threw 64 passes last year and 6 as a freshman, which means, hold on a second. He threw 2 as a freshman. He's thrown 66 passes in his career.
Yep.
And he's thrown 6 interceptions in 70 attempts.
It drives me crazy, man. The NFL draft community on Twitter, which I do love dearly, but I've seen second round grades on Anthony Richardson.
I've seen him as in a top
film. Are you,
dude? I've seen him in the top 10 in some mock drafts from websites that are not who the heck is that guy?
I have his name. I have his name on a list to keep track of, right? But
athletically, you cannot not have him on the list.
Sure.
Right.
You can't you can't grade a kid that has only thrown 66 passes in his career. It's just not.
Yeah, he's thrown 66 passes and 6 of them have been intercepted. Come on. That's just that's some nuts. And then he started against Georgia.
Yep. And
he shouldn't have. That was unfair to him.
Sure
that's the first start you're going to give that kid is against Georgia, seriously, and then not play him the rest of the year. That was dumb. But he went 12 of 20 for 82 yards and 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So like I said, athletically, I'm putting the kid on there. Size, big arm, and all that. But, man, come on now. Yep. Anyway, we'll have to see how he pans out. But yeah, no quarterbacks last year. Isn't it? Was Ritter the only quarterback last year?
Braxton Burmeister, you said.
That's right. That's right.
How is he not on? He's back. San Diego State,
right?
Baby. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, you had Malik Willis was on the list last year.
Okay.
You had Desmond Ritter was on the list last year. Stone Smart from Old Dominion. So he was on the list last year.
Yeah.
Yep. And Luke Doty was on the list last year.
He's
and
back.
then Braxton Burmeister. So 5 quarterbacks were on the list last year, only 1 this year. So
Crazy.
Yeah, interesting. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. We are going to dive into a mailbag next, so don't leave just yet. But before we transition to the mailbag, I would ask that all of you would give us a like on this show, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast. Ryan, let's dive into the mailbag, and let's start off with I appreciate this comment from Alan Watson. You're both freaks in journalism. Thank you. And then
is that good or bad? I don't know.
I think it's good. Alan, I think you meant that in love. At least that's what I'm gonna tell myself and make me feel better. Tommy Guns had a question that I thought was interesting. Is Cam Hart what Dante Vaughn could have been had he stayed healthy?
I would say this, Brian, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I think Cam Hart is significantly more talented than Dante Vaughn. I think Dante Vaughn should have been a much better player at Notre Dame if injuries did not occur. Because, I mean, when he was a freshman, I was like, dude.
He was their best corner when he was a freshman. Yeah, he was their best corner in 2016.
I was like, dude's going to be a baller, right? And it's a similar in the sense, Tommy, that they're both long and super big corners, sure. But I just think Cam's a better athlete overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, he's definitely a better athlete. I mean, that's the thing is even with all of Dante was really good as a freshman because he's long, he's pretty strong, he has really good instincts. As a corner guy, he played the ball really well. Flipped his hips okay, but it was really just about the length, and the speed for his length was good.
Yeah,
Cam is freaky for athletically. And I also think the other thing that helps Cam too is Cam is a lot more fluid and clean as an athlete. Dante was always a guy that was either going to be a press guy or an off guy. And as a press guy, I was like, if he doesn't jam you at the line, he's in trouble.
Yes.
And we saw that against Clemson. He missed on some jams and he just couldn't recover. Cam's got better recovery speed. But we never did see Dante at his best because of the injuries. And Mike Elko, for whatever reason, just wasn't as high on him as he was other guys, which is fine. I don't think he necessarily fit that system a whole lot. He did get a chance to kind of earn some playing time, but even then, he couldn't stay healthy. But he had some really good games in his career. I mean, he was in 2019 against Virginia Tech. He was outstanding. He couldn't stay healthy, and he never got back to being his peak athlete. But Dante spent like 2 years in the NFL with the Chargers. Mm-hmm. So, it says a lot. But, yeah, they're different players. Different players. I would say, Tommy, I understand where the comparison comes from. I do.
100%.
I do.
Similar sized guys, right? I mean, like they're both about 6'2" and some change and have long arms. And, yeah, I totally get where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no issue with that. But they're different type of players. And the upside for Cam is much better. Much better than the other.
Agree.
Got another one here from 99 Problems BK1. He says, I'm not actually surprised. I don't know. Foskey seems underrated to me, but my Notre Dame fandom might cause me to overrate Foskey. I don't think that your fandom is causing you to overrate Isaiah Foskey. I think that's the thing that when I'll ask myself, Ryan, okay, am I overrating a guy? Mm-hmm. It's when I'm the only person that feels that way.
Right.
And it doesn't mean I'm going to change my opinion. But at least means I'm going to be like, okay, let me rethink this. Like, I know you and I have both done this with Jason Adamiola. Yeah. We've both gone back and like, okay, I'm just going to watch the film again. And maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm overhyping him or I'm overlooking some holes in his game or some flaws and things like that. Right. And you go back to it and you're like, no, I still feel the same way. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'm going to, I'm still going to own it. Right. Mm-hmm. But Foskey's a guy that's getting the love everywhere. It's not just Notre Dame fans. It's NFL draft people. And Bruce Feldman a year ago before he even broke out had him on the freaks list, right? Yeah. At number 45. I don't know what Foskey's done to not be on there this year, but it is what it is. But I don't think 99 that you're over. The only way you can overrate Isaiah Foskey, you're like, he's going to be the number 1 pick and he's going to have 19 sacks this year. And okay, buddy, like pump the brakes. Yeah. But no, if you think he's like one of the best edge players in the country and he's a freaky athlete for pound, no, you're not overrating him. You're kind of saying what everybody else that's evaluated him thinks about him.
And you should always check your bias, though. So I agree with you completely. Like I graded out Isaiah Foskey very high from an NFL draft perspective, but I know that I have an allegiance to Notre Dame and I have a fandom, right? So I reached out to 3 to 4 different NFL scouts, and then I get the NFS report back also from the NFL side of things, and everyone's high on Isaiah Foskey. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm just verifying basically that I'm not biased in that regard. Isaiah Foskey is a fantastic talent, fantastic player. NFL people like him. College football fans, for the most part, give him, I think, his due as far as being one of the better defensive linemen in college football. So I don't think you're overrating him at all. I think that he is a fantastic player, one of the best players in college football, in my opinion.
What's funny is you say other college football fans. I think other than Archer, I don't think a single Ohio State fan that I've ever interacted with has any clue who Isaiah Foskey is.
It's fair.
Like, there's guys on my YouTube channel for something I posted over a month ago, a couple months ago. Every time they come across it, they lose their minds. How can you say this Foskey guy is better than, the 5 stars, Zach Harrison and, Jack? And I'm like, you have no clue who Isaiah Foskey is, do you? Like, none. So I've found that to be a strange, very, very strange. Somebody asked, where does Feldman get the data? Coaches, team coaches, and strength coaches.
Yes. Yep. Directly from the schools. So he usually does his rounds in the preseason. So he'll be around to the schools, checking in with the head coaches, the strength coaches, calling people, doing all that type of stuff. So Bruce does a great job in that regard. He does his due diligence. He's on the road for months. He's calling people for months. So it's directly from the coaches that see these players every day.
Yep. We got Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, Brian and Ryan, in his day back in the 80s. How freaky was Brian Bosworth? Also, where would you rank him on greatest college linebackers list? Thank you, as always. Great show. You want to go ahead and take the first crack at that a little tour before your time?
I know the legend of the Boz, right? I know the mullet. I know the getting run over by Bo Jackson on the goal line. I know what he accomplished at Oklahoma. I have all that historical context for him, but I didn't personally see him play. I know that I even saw didn't he have a 30 for 30 on Bosworth?
It was very well done. Very well done.
I love that. I thought it was really fun and just kind of entertaining in that regard. And I know a good amount about Bosworth, but like I didn't actually see him play at Oklahoma, right? So like I don't know. I don't have context for telling you how freaky of an athlete he was.
And he was also admittedly on steroids. I mean,
true.
So that's a thing. And
he's very open about it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and when you know what he's overcome in life, you understand why he's so open about his struggles. I mean, it's part of his testimony. And it's really funny because I grew up watching when he was the Boz, right? I mean, I was a child of the 80s. I remember the renegade he was, and I didn't particularly care for him back then, and I've now come around to being somewhat similar to his viewpoint on what the NCAA is all about. But yeah, he was a great player, but I don't know if he wasn't like Jalen Smith. He wasn't like that kind of athlete. He was really, really good. The thing about the Boz, though, he was also part of his greatness was just about the persona of the Boz. I mean, he was a great linebacker, but like I don't know if anyone would say, "Hey, this guy was an all-time great." When you pop the film in, it was more about the persona. He's a really good player, but then the persona I think was part of it too. But that's the funny thing is, so like my wife and I, one of the streaming channels we subscribe to it's called Pure Flix, and it's like either Christian shows or like wholesome shows, things like that. And there's this series of like post-apocalyptic, like post-rapture, like Wild West type shows, right? And Boz is one of the guys in there. He's in a bunch of Christian movies. So then I'm like watching this other Christian movie. And it's called What You Believe, and Boz is in there, and he's this really nice guy that like takes care of this little girl, and he's dying of cancer and all. It's just like that's not the guy I remember growing up with the crazy hair and the steroids and and all that kind of stuff. It's a pretty cool redemption story.
That's really funny, man, because he was actually in The Longest Yard as well. Remember when he was in the guard in The Longest Yard?
The one with Adam Sandler. Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah, he was in there, I forgot about that. But yeah, it's really funny seeing how his life has completely changed from what it was before.
Good for him.
It really is cool. It really is cool. But that's not the Boz I remember growing up. But my point is that's why he's so open with his struggles. It's a part of his Christian faith and saying, hey, look, you got to own who you were to truly find redemption and salvation. So it is pretty cool. It is pretty cool.
And let's be honest, man, he was kind of like, he was a trendsetter, right? Like how many mullets did you see growing up? And then, even Coastal Carolina is still rocking the mullets today, right? Like he was revolutionary in that.
Yeah. And then like the crazy stuff on the side and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. He was a weird guy, very weird guy back in the day.
Yep.
I like him a whole lot more now than I did then. Blaine Tiller says, B. Ryan, what excites you more this year, the start of the season or the end of the current recruiting cycle? Well, I call it even, but for completely different reasons.
Yes. I mean, honestly, it's always going to be football for me, right? Like, I just want to get to the season because I'm excited about Notre Dame football. But Blaine, in a couple recent days, I would say that I am looking forward to the signing day and just to get this one over with because, man, some people are overreacting big time. But it's always going to be the start of football season for me.
Yeah.
It's a long off season without it.
Yeah, I'm always more of a football guy than a recruiting guy, but I'm not going to lie to you. Just the constant panic. I mean, in this chat is a perfect example about recruiting is just like, it reminds me of why I don't miss covering on a daily basis and why I hired you to do it because, I just, definitely football.
It's exhausting at times. It's exhausting.
Yeah,
at times.
It really is. Especially now in this era of clickbait that now we have to respond to every clickbait thing that gets put out there. And it's maddening. John Leahy asks, B. Ryan, do you think that Prince Kollie could end up on this list next year?
That's an interesting one, John. I mean, athletically, I don't know what kind of tester he is, right? Like, I mean, from the film I've seen, looks like a freaky dude, right? Like he can move, he's explosive, he's well put together. You could talk me into it. It's just, but the other part of it is, John, is like, we talked about it. Most of the players on the list do have the name recognition stuff too. So if Prince plays a lot this year, which we're hoping that, he can obviously carve out a role, but if he plays a lot and he's somewhat productive and then he has those types of crazy numbers, it's possible, but it's just, if he doesn't break out this year to a degree, then it's just, he's not going to be the first guy that you talk about for a Notre Dame football team, if that makes sense.
I think he's a good athlete. I don't think he's a freaky athlete for me. I don't think he's quite that level of guy at this point in time. Got another one from Brandon Plensner. Brandon says, which NDDBs do you expect to be matched up with Marvin Harrison and against Smith and Jigba the majority of the game on September 3rd, especially since Harrison is a 4-2 guy?
I think the easy answer for me, Brandon, is I know Brian, like we talked about this yesterday, Brian thinks that Smith and Jigba might play a little more outside, right? But I think
more than last year, yeah.
Yeah, more than last year, sure.
More because I just think they're going to move him around more is what I mean by that, right? Not that he's going to become the X, but I just think they're going to move him around more, in my opinion.
Right. So, I mean, in this theory for me, I think that Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably going to play more into the boundary, right? So I think that to the field, we're going to see more Smith and Jigba, and then even Emeka might be a guy that plays a little more to the field. So I actually don't think that we'll see a ton of Cam against Marvin Harrison Jr. unless he's playing more to the field. I think that's, unless Cam is switched and is playing more into the boundary, like we've talked a ton of. But how it currently stands, I actually think that Cam's going to see more Smith and Jigba and Emeka than anything, in my opinion.
Right. Based on where they lined up last year, yes.
Yes.
Because I do think he's going to play more outside, Jackson Smith and Jigba. I don't think he's playing in the boundary a whole lot. I could see him. This is where I come from. Like Ryan Day, to me, if he's smart, he's got to know that last year it made sense to play him the way that they played him. But there's things you can do with him. He's not smaller than Devonte Smith, and Devonte Smith played every game. You'd see him in snaps in the boundary. Just to because you could do some things to create isolations. You could run off the wide side guys, run like vertical routes, kind of a 3-layered all verts from that side, vertical seam, backside seam, or run two guys sort of right up the middle and then one up the seam because you're trying to run the coverage off, and so getting guys to flip their hips, because if you run a backside seam, then you can cause guys to kind of turn and then they will see a drag route or a crossing route. But if you just kind of keep them vertical against a team that likes to play a little bit more man or pattern match, then you can do things with that boundary where you can kind of bring them on a delay, drag, cross, where you're clearing that out. I mean, there's things that I think they'll do stuff like that. Are they going to put them into the boundary and say, hey, we're going to run comeback routes and back shoulders to you all day? No. Why not have Emeka and Marvin Harrison do those things? They're bigger players. But I just think, and if you're Notre Dame, you got to be prepared for that. Right. And if they don't do it, if they just leave them one spot, then it makes it easier for you to have at least a schematic plan for them. It doesn't make it easier to stop them. It just makes him easier to know where he is and have a plan for him. And then you got to execute in order to stop him. But That's kind of the difference.
And I think you also have to mention Tariq Bracey, obviously. I think he's going to be a big player in the slot, right? Like if we see Jackson Smith and Jigba playing a ton in the slot, I anticipate that Tariq's going to have a nice game, right?
Yeah.
Like I think he's a very important player. I mean, because we always talk about, Cam Hart taking away this guy and Clarence Lewis doing a good job on the other side and Ryan Barnes doing whatever. Not many people talk about the nickel corner though, right? And I think in this offense, when you have so many different good wide receivers, whether it's a Mecca working in the slot, whether it is Jackson Smith and Jigba working in the slot, whoever it ends up being, the nickel corner, I anticipate Tariq's going to play a lot in that football game, and he needs to have a good game, in my opinion, for Notre Dame to have a realistic chance to stop that offense.
Yep. Good one. John Wayne's Winchester, Bama and Notre Dame meet in the playoffs. Will Anderson rushes against Blake Fisher, let's say 10 times. How many pancakes does Blake get? 11. I'd be happy with 1 or 2.
Yes, yeah. Like, especially in pass pro, because I mean, run game, you're going to see a lot more pancakes.
Yeah, he'll get a couple. Actually, I think he'd even get more in the pass game if he were to get any. Just because wide rush, you just put him on the ground and then kind of fall on him, like a wide rush. But Will Anderson doesn't get taken to the ground very often unless he wants to be on the ground. So I love the optimism, John Wayne's Winchester, but no. No. He meant to type 1, and he just, it got stuck and put 11 on there.
Sure.
10-Day says, how many Notre Dame players have played for the Chargers? Come to Notre Dame, you'll at least get a shot with the Chargers. They went through a stretch there with their GM where they had like 9 Notre Dame kids. Like, because remember that one year they drafted Tillery and Isaac Rochelle like a couple years apart, and then they drafted like Elohi Gilman and Drew Tranquil, and then they had signed as non-drafted free agents. They signed like Osmar Bilal, Dante Vaughn, and Tyler Newsome, and it was like, and then if you want to get real technical, Jalen Guyton, who started his career at Notre Dame. So it's like they had drafted Chris Watt, although it was a different regime, drafted Chris Watt. They signed Manti Te'o at one point in time. So it was like, they love some Notre Dame players, man. I don't know if the current regime is still that way, but when what's the name of their previous coach? Real good dude. He played running, but Anthony Lynn was there.
Anthony Lynn,
that when he was there, and is it the same GM or do they have a new GM? They had a young guy there.
It's the same. I think it's Smith, right? Last name Smith. Oh no,
no, it was his last name with a T, I believe.
I should know this.
Yeah, his
AJ Smith, right? AJ
no,
Smith.
he's not. He was he's not. He's not here. I'm gonna pull it up.
Yeah,
I'm trying to see who, because I don't think it's the same guy. Yeah, it is Tom Telesco. Yeah, that's who it was.
I'm an idiot. Yeah.
AJ Smith was before that. Yeah, Tom Telesco's been there since 13. He's still the GM, but he loves drafting Notre Dame guys.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure when they did the coaching turnover if they also did a GM turnover or not.
I should have remembered that one because Telesco was actually high school teammates or graduates in the same year with Brian Dayball, who is now the Giants head coach. And that was like the big rumor for a while. I was like, he's bringing over his high school teammate or something like that. But it didn't happen.
How's Staley done so far in your view?
He is all right. So he was a Rams defensive coordinator. He's a really sharp defensive mind. I really like him as a defensive coordinator. I'm not sold as a head coach at all. He's very analytically driven, and he
does too much.
Yeah, man. I think it was the game last year. It was like fourth down from like their own 30-yard line, 4th and 3, and then he went for it, and they didn't get it. I'm just like, that's not good situational football. Yeah. I know analytics will tell me always go for it on 4th down, but like we know that you shouldn't always go for it on 4th down. Like it's not apples to apples, but whatever.
Yep. Michael S. with a super chat. Michael says, Matt LaFleur, what was his history as a Notre Dame assistant, recruiter, QB coach? Why did he leave so quick? Was he a bust? He was here for just a year. It was 2014. And I don't think he was a bust. I mean, I think honestly, Everett Golson would have been worse if Matt LaFleur wasn't here, because he developed some really bad habits with working with George Whitfield, some really bad habits. And I think Matt LaFleur helped with that. But the reality is Matt LaFleur just was not invested in being Notre Dame. It was a 1-year stop for him, and he was moving on. I think he knew it from the beginning. There's some stories about him on the recruiting trail where I heard this from a parent of a 5-star kid at USC. that, yeah, my kid and Rasheem Green were really interested in Notre Dame, and we had called and tried to set something up with Matt LaFleur, and he said, hey, I'll call you back with visit plans. And he's like, I never returned our call. He never called back. We tried to call, he never returned a call. And they probably still would have ended up at USC, but it's just one of those things where it's like he was here for a year, and which is fine. But Kelly then let him. Kelly acted like he was going to be here for longer, and so he trusted him as a recruiter and all this kind of stuff, and he didn't. He wasn't invested. But as a quarterbacks coach, I think he did a pretty good job, with those guys. So, we'll kind of see how that goes. But yeah, he wasn't real locked in at Notre Dame.
He was a sharp he's a sharp offensive mind. He actually was he was at the pro day. I remember I saw him at the pro day for Notre Dame. So yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you for the super chat, Michael. Ian Johnson asks, as of now, do you think if Ohio State comes out in how Oklahoma State beat us, do you think if press man, loaded box, quick tempo, that we can deal with it? I'll ask again after fall camp is over to see any opinion changes. I don't think fall camp's going to change it a whole lot. I think that they're going to be better prepared to deal with it. Number one, you're going to have a defensive coordinator running the show that I think is a little bit more prepared to make adjustments if things aren't working or they're beating with something. And that was the thing last year. So there just were no adjustments made until late in the game when it was too late. Marcus Freeman eventually stepped in, but it was too late. He gave them maybe too much time. We've explained why we think that is, talking to sources, but reality is he stepped in too late. Offensively, they tried making adjustments. There just wasn't anything that they could do about it because the offensive line and the receivers weren't prepared. So I think they'll be better prepared to deal with it, no question. And I think you have an offseason. And the other thing, too, is your struggles in that game are going to then help you be prepared for what you're going to see then. Because even though it wasn't Jim Knowles running that defense, it was still his defense that they were running to a degree, with their own tendencies and all that. So you're going to see that. Plus, Notre Dame had 12 full games to prepare, 13 full games to evaluate his defense last year, getting ready for one game. So you're really preparing for the same defense for 2 games in a row. And you've got a lot of time in those 2 games to prepare and watch a lot of film. So I think they'll be prepared, be in much better position to deal with it to the point where it'll just come down to execution at that point in time and which team executes better. But I don't think we're going to look back and be like, wow, Notre Dame got out schemed, they got out coached. It'll just be a situation where 2 really good teams played and Ohio State just played better and took advantage of matchups better or whatever the case may be. Because the concerning thing for Notre Dame is you can do things to take the outside jump balls out of the way, but the Ohio State run game concerns me a lot more than the Oklahoma State run game did last year.
Sure.
And now Oklahoma State had good numbers running the ball, but a lot of that was just the quarterback scrambling. I mean, that was the big thing from last year's game was just the quarterback scrambles were killed Notre Dame.
Wasn't Jalen Warren not playing in that game too, right? Did he play against Notre Dame? I can't remember.
I think he played. I know
he missed the big.
Yeah, he had 19. Yeah, he had 19 carries for 82 yards. Gotcha. So I mean, that's barely 4 yards a carry.
Yeah.
125 of their 234 yards were Spencer Sanders. So it's scrambles.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's where a lot of their run game production came from. But yeah, that was a brutally bad performance by Notre Dame. And I'd be surprised to see him have 2 bad ones like that in a row.
Yeah. I don't anticipate CJ Stroud running for 125 yards against Notre Dame.
No.
Personally.
No, that'd be a really bad sign.
I will say, Brian, at least 2 out of these things I feel very confident with just from, I mean, it all spurns off of just better coaching at the wide receiver and offensive line positions for me, right? It's because press man, I would be surprised if Notre Dame was as bad against press man this year as they were last year. I think naturally they'll be better, and that will also help with the loaded box stuff, right? If you have wide receivers who can create instant separation, you're not going to be able to load the box quite as well, quite as easily as you did last year, and that's on top of Tyler Buckner being the run threat that he is, right? Like that's going to loosen up some boxes for you as well. So I agree.
Yep. I think the tempo is the thing that I'm more concerned about, to be honest with you. Like I do. Will they adjust well to that? That's the bigger concern that I have.
Sure.
Tom Flavin says, Brian emphasizes the importance of dudes being dudes to succeed. You're turning me into like Steve Adazio there, Tom. That was his expression, dudes being dudes. You remember that when he was a BC? He would say that, dudes being dudes. Apart from recruiting dudes, how are they developed in a football program? That's a really good question, Tom. It's a lot of different things. It's obviously the strength conditioning program is a big part of it. So that way you're maximizing a player's physical potential. There comes the point where, like, do you recruit kids that fit the scheme that you'd like to run? Because that does matter. You don't want to take a kid who, if you're taking a kid whose game doesn't fit your scheme and then you're, kind of tailoring the two things, it's not as simple as like, we'll just fit the scheme around him. Well, what if the other 10 guys don't fit the scheme that works for that kid, right? So there's got to be some recruiting the right kind of kids to it. Assuming that they're doing that, it's then, developing the technique, making kids know how to play the game, physically how to play the game, how to line up, how to, what makes Harry Hiestand so great, Ryan? It's not, he's got these really crazy complex run schemes and nobody knows how to play it. No, it's his guys are fundamentally sound, tough, and physical. That comes down to teaching technique. That comes down to mindset. And it comes down to your practice is designed in a way to make sure you're maximizing the opportunities to teach the things that you emphasize as a football coach. Sure. And I think the best teams in the country are those that understand that technique and talent is going to trump scheme without those two things. Yeah. And Alabama won, 9, 11, 12, 15. They won 17. 5 of their titles and of their 6 titles, in my opinion, were won with very mediocre offenses in a lot of different ways, meaning they weren't the high octane 40+ points per game, mediocre relative to what we see now. Alabama won titles where they were barely scoring more than what Notre Dame scored in 15 or 19 and 21. But what they were on offense was really efficient, well coached, physical. And then they were the same way on defense. And I think that gets over. I actually think Alabama's has not been coached as well last 4 or 5 years compared to where they were early, because I think their talent has actually been better in recent years. Athletically, they're in more high-octane offenses. They score a lot more points, but they're not winning as much as they did early in his career. I mean, they won 3 titles in 4 years at one point in time during his career. So, I don't think they're as fundamentally sound as they've been in the past. But when they were really rolling from like 09 to 15, I thought they were a really fundamentally sound team. Fundamentally sound team. And I think that is part of it too. And then there's things like there's the mental part of the game, and it's not just learning the system. It's the deep mental, the psyche aspect of it. Do you have guys ready to handle adversity? I mean, if you ever talk to like a, Navy SEAL, and teams will bring in Navy SEALs. Well, the whole point is of that is big training to be a SEAL is they try to break your will, your spirit, your psyche. You're not trying to do that to football players. But what you are trying to do is find ways that you can put them in situations in the classroom, in the meeting room, on the football field, in the weight room, where you are pushing them past the point that they think they're capable of getting to. And that you put them in stressful situations that they then have to show a level of ability to overcome adversity. Like, those are the things that the great coaches do. That's why Lou Holtz always played those mind games with players. And a lot of his players say, like, I didn't understand why he did that stuff when I was going through it. But now looking back as an adult, you're like, oh, I see what he's trying to do. Like, that's why we were always tougher. That's why we were always more physical than the other teams. That's why we never quit. That's why we were this. That's why we were that. Because, oh, I get it now. That's why coach did that, because there was nothing that they could throw us on Saturday, any type of adversity that we weren't going to be prepared for. And I think those are the different aspects that go into developing a player, each individual player, and then those players make up the program. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that has hurt Notre Dame at quarterback, for example, is I think that they have not put the quarterbacks in position to thrive mentally. And I'm not even talking about executing the offense. I'm just talking about handling just every aspect of it. Like when your head coach acts the way that Brian Kelly acted towards quarterbacks so often, that it was like they'd come off the field and Brian Kelly's telling them something, and then they'd go talk to the quarterback coach and he'd tell them something, and then they'd get on the phone to go talk to the offensive coordinator and he'd tell them something, and it was like 3 or different things that the quarterback was being told.
Too many voices,
way too many. And then when your head coach doesn't know what they're talking about, and he says something to the quarterback, and the OC's like, no, that's not what we're doing, that's going to create problems. I think there's like the players are not allowed to have the confidence in themselves or the system around them to play to their peak, because that's the final piece. Is there's football as much as any sport, if not more. It's like I don't like comparing it to the military a lot because that's war, that's life and death, and football's not life and death. But there's one aspect of it that there's a lot of aspects that I think do carry over in regard to the importance of the team. And you talk to anybody that served overseas, and I'm giving you my experience. I had a grandfather that fought in World War II. I got his record. Fought in the Battle of the Bulge and earned different honors and things like that. I have relatives served in Iraq, and people in our chat that I know that served in the military that have fought overseas, right? And they'll tell you, like, when you're in it, it's about the man next to you. It's hey, I got to trust him. Because my life is in his hands. His life is in my hands. And we've got to work as a team, because if one person in that team kind of goes off script, that affects all of us. Mm-hmm. I think football is very much like that. And if you don't have trust in your commanders, right? If you don't have trust that, hey, this commander, like, you ever study George Patton? It's fascinating. Like the loyalty and the trust that his troops showed in him. He could say, go do this really bizarre thing, and they would do it and just know that it was going to work because they trusted the old man, right? Yeah. Right. And sometimes maybe it wasn't the best strategy, but they carried it out as if they just knew and it would work. And football is that way as well. You got to trust the man next to you. That's cultivated through your training. That's cultivated through the mental and physical deals that you go through in practice and preparation, getting up before the sun's up, and you're done when the sun's down, and all those type of things. But then also trusting your captains, your generals, your lieutenants, who are the quarterback coach, the receivers coach, the offensive coordinator, the head coach. And if there's not faith in all aspects of that, you're not going to be the best team you can be.
Right.
And I think that's the part that I think has been missing a lot for Notre Dame in recent seasons. So I hope that answers that question. Anything you'd like to add to that, Ryan?
No, I was just going to say, for the coaching aspect of everything, I love that you're kind of like talking about cultivating the mental side and the physical side equally. But I also think that sometimes coaches can kind of get in their own way and not letting dudes be dudes, right? Like, you have to really, I think, to be a great coach, you also need to understand a player's strengths fully, right? And ask him to do things that not only are they comfortable with, but that they excel at, right? Like, so don't hamstring a player. Don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole. Get out of your way and let dudes be dudes, because there might be some things that they do that maybe aren't even structurally the most sound things sometimes, but like, it's like having a great safety that is a little bit of a freelancer, but you're trying to be like, nope, you need to do this and that, and that's all you do. And you're actually hamstringing them. Like, you're limiting the impact that he can do in that regard, right? So, I mean, to your point, I think that the coaching side is as important as just the athlete in general. Right. Its ability to take what they do well and allow them to do it. Don't get in your own way when you're a coach sometimes.
Yep. Really good question, Tom. Really good question. John A1 with a question. John asks, how does Audric Estime compare to Willis McGahee? Similar frame, right? Both have good feet and flexibility and speed to beat linebackers to the edge. I think McGahee had a better initial burst, and then John had a little bit more to that. Let me get to the rest of his comment here if I can find it. I do not see the rest of his comment. He said a little bit more burst. I don't see what else John added to that. But there were some people in the chat saying, like, if not for that devastating injury he suffered against Ohio State in the championship game, that he'd have had a better career. I still can't believe that he came back and even played in the NFL after that injury. But he was a good player.
He was still a first-round pick after that too, man. And he was a good player early on, with the Bills, and then he went to the Ravens, and he was a pretty good player still. But that's an interesting comp, John, because I do agree that from a body type perspective, pretty similar looking athletes. I would agree with you, though. I think that Willis had a little more vertical burst, especially early on in reps. Like Willis McGahee before that injury, especially, and even into his NFL career as he got like more healthy. My guy can move.
Dude had 4,000-yard seasons in the NFL. That's nuts when you consider the injury he sustained.
Oh, that injury was gruesome, man. It was absolutely gruesome. I made my wife watch that one time, Brian, like when we first met, and she's like, "Don't ever make me watch that again in my entire life." I'm like, it was gruesome, man. But I mean, he was a special athlete at Miami and still a really good NFL player for what he was dealt.
McGahee, I mean, similar traits, a lot of similar traits, but yes, just some guys are very similar traits wise. Other guys, he's just better at those traits. And as of right now, that's what we see from Willis McGahee. Aldrich's has to show that, but he's a very good football player. John A1 also says, why does Riley Mills project better on the out? This is a really good question. Why does Riley Mills project better on the outside? Does he play with strong hands? Is there anything you can point to as to why? Now that he's put on 30 pounds since arriving, could he be better inside now? Take first crack at that.
Yeah, I think he could be, John. I think that he could be a substantial, productive player at either spot, if I'm being honest. Why I think it's better for Riley is I think Riley is more of a block defeater with his flexibility and ability to kind of contort his body in different ways. I don't think he's the most. I think he has powerful hands, but I think it's different when you're working inside, trying to work against multiple blocks and combos and that type of thing, right? So I think he's more of a slipper. So like if he's a 3-tech and you're just asking him to purely, just shoot one gap and to just use his flexibility in that regard, I think he could be a really good player in that department. But I think for me, Brian, I think his style is just a little more finesse than it is aggressive, just a little bit. So I think that it's working outside in might be a better option for him than inside out.
I would disagree with the notion of it being finesse. I would say, I think we're probably saying the same thing. I would say it differently. Just because when I hear finesse, I don't want to hear that about an alignment. I think Riley's style and just is, I want to get around you as opposed to standing there. I want to be going forward. And I think there comes a point in time too, Ryan, where defensive linemen are a lot like offensive linemen. Some guys are just more comfortable in space. Some guys are just more comfortable in short areas. Riley's a really long athlete.
Yes.
And I don't think he's really comfortable inside as much where everything is happening so quickly. And really long athlete, and not just long as an arm length, because Jason Adamiola, I think, has some pretty long arms, but also long in that he's really high cut. And I think that part of his body type just fits better out, at least for him, and he's more comfortable outside. I think he's a guy that also just, again, likes to use his hands to do moves, and I think he's just more comfortable on the edge. I also think his athleticism fits there. I think the thing that, when I look at Riley Mills, I say this about all types of different positions. Stop talking to me about what a guy's size is. Talk to me about, can he play at that size? Well, this guy's going to outgrow the linebacker. What does that mean? Well, he's going to be 250 pounds. So is Leo Chanel. Right. That guy was a freaking linebacker. You know what I mean? Like
the monster.
Right. It's not about outgrowing it. Unless the outgrowing also comes with a loss of athletic talent, right? Sure. Well, that guy's going to be 225 pounds. He's going to outgrow safety. Not necessarily. Can he still move? Can he still run? Can he still change direction the same way he did before? Then he's not going to outgrow it. And I think that's the thing is we look at just weight and say, 6'5", 293, that's an inside guy. That's not how he plays, though. I think he just plays. I think his cut, I think his comfort level, I think the things he likes to do that he's comfortable with his own game are things that progress to me or project to me more as an outside guy. And I think he could be a good inside player, but I just feel like what we've seen of him, he just looks more comfortable outside. So I don't think there's a wrong answer on where he plays from a skill set standpoint. I think part of it is just where's he most comfortable. We see this at receiver, Ryan. Guys that maybe are built like outside guys just seem more comfortable inside. Guys that seem like they should be inside guys because of their size are really good outside because they're just more comfortable out there.
Right.
And, like Steve Smith is like body type wise is the prototype slot receiver. Steve Smith's an outside receiver. Why? Because his game fits that. Even though his body doesn't fit it, his game fit it.
Antonio Brown played outside mostly too.
Yeah. Who's again, another guy that's not like built like your typical, your stereotypical outside receiver.
Right.
Does T.Y. Hilton play? Did he play a lot outside, or was he more of a slot guy?
No, he's more an outside guy because they like to stretch it vertically.
Because he's another small guy that you would think, but his game projects outside, right? So I think that's the same. It's the same thing with defensive linemen. But John, great question. And by the way, I just noticed your avatar's got the IB thing on the logo. That's flipping awesome, man.
Oh, I didn't even see that.
Yeah, I just noticed that. I was like, what is that? That's awesome. I love that. Love that. Tommy Gunn says, B. Ryan, I decided to start my Trekkie journey and just finished Star Wars Episode 5. Which movie or spinoff is your favorite? Can you rank how you like them? Is this just of the Star Treks? Star Wars?
So he said he started his Trekkie journey and just finished episode. Wait, so are we doing Star Trek and Star Wars together? Is that what's happening?
I have no idea.
Tommy?
Isn't this a conversation that you and Vince had?
Yeah, we're talking a lot about Star Wars. We're talking a lot about Star
Yeah, I never
Wars.
watched Star Trek, so I couldn't.
I didn't
Yeah.
watch Star Trek either. My brother-in-law actually makes fun of me because he says Star Trek is better than Star Wars, and I say that Star Wars is better, even though I've never actually seen Star Trek. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't a big fan of Star Trek, but it just, I'll tell you what, I did like the new Star Treks with Chris Pine. I'm not gonna lie to you. I did like those. I liked those better than the previous ones. But because I watched the Star Treks when I was younger, because my dad, we would go to the movies and watch the movies. I didn't watch the TV series.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously the originals are great. Of the three, the prequels kind of thing, I thought those were bad.
All of them?
I didn't like any of them. Although I thought Qui-Gon Jinn was a bad dude. Like Liam Neeson rocked that character, man.
I love Liam Neeson, man.
But overall, they just were bad. Great graphics, right? And the storylines were just kind of. And Hayden Christensen is just.
You don't
like
Hayden Christensen?
No, not in that role. And then the worst one, Natalie Portman's like she was just like way over too dramatic and just. Like,
I didn't love her. Ewan McGregor's my guy though.
Yes, he was that the Obi-Wan could like. There were characters I liked,
sure,
but the movies I didn't like. I liked Qui-Gon Jinn. I liked Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. But yeah, just some of the stuff on there was just like, this is really lame.
What's your opinion on Jar Jar Binks? Are you a fan?
Oh God, no. That whole thing was just so dumb. Like,
the best fan theory I've ever saw is, I'm not trying to spoil anything if you haven't seen the newest three, like the three after the originals. So there was a fan theory that the one bad guy in the new sequence was actually Jar Jar Binks resurrected or something.
Oh, the Snape guy or whatever it was?
Yeah, whatever. A Snook or whatever.
Something like that. Snoke, right? Something like that?
Yeah, General Snoke. Someone said that was going to be Jar Jar Binks in the end, which would have been great.
Whatever. Whatever. The new ones were good. They were good. They weren't bad. They weren't great. They were good. The first couple were better.
I liked the first one, and then the last two, they lost me.
Yeah.
They lost me on the last two,
Yeah, just like that whole weird thing between Rey and Han Solo's kid, Kylo Ren, was just kind of weird and just like forced. But the action was good. Yeah.
I also really like Adam Driver as an actor, but I hated him as Kylo Ren. Like, he was just not good. Yeah. It wasn't his fault. They just made that character so bad. Like,
they did. And I didn't think the writing on the last two was very good, to be honest with you. So it was kind of weird. And didn't Carrie Fisher die before the last one? Yes. Right? Didn't she? Okay, because she was supposed to be in the last one, right?
She was still in it. They like messed, they made it that way or whatever. But
right. But I mean, she was supposed to have a bigger role in the last one, I think. But just some of the character development was really bad in the last two, and they just like, there were storylines that started, but they didn't finish. Like, I just thought the first three, it was all woven together so well. Yes. And I just never felt I actually think the story arc was more consistent in the prequels than it was in the last three. I just think the acting, the characters were better in the last three, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was. I was also let down by a lot of like the character development. I would agree on like the last three because like I was like, after the first one, I was like, man, I really am so interested to see what Rey's origin are. And then I was just like, at the end, I'm just like, oh, okay. Listen.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
They never took it to where I thought they were going to take it. Right.
Ever. Yeah. And they had so many possibilities, man.
Yeah.
Endless possibilities.
Yeah. They got lazy with it. And I didn't love how they had, I just didn't love Luke Skywalker's character in the last.
They turned him from a hero into a dud.
A whiny little.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Very. And it's hard to have, sequels. That's what I found so fascinating about the Lord of the Rings and why I will not watch the Rings of Power that just came out on Prime or whatever. Because that's the one series, and there's been a few, but that's to me the best one ever. That and I'll say the Harry Potters I thought really did a good job too.
They did a good job
getting better. But the Lord of the Rings got better every time. And the first one was good. It's a little long, but they purposely it was long because they did so much good character development in the first one. Yep. And then it just the storylines and the action were really good in the last two. So I thought that was one of the few that actually got better.
It's so easy to tell if a movie's going to be good or not for me nowadays, because if it's below 2 hours, I'm like, that's not going to have enough character development.
Yeah.
Like every time they try to do the Suicide Squad thing, right? And I'm just like, oh, that sounds cool in theory. Like I would like that. And then I'm like, oh, it's an hour and 50 minutes. Like,
have you ever seen them remake a movie more times with different characters than in a short period of time than Suicide Squad? Like, don't they normally like wait 20 years to redo a movie with different characters?
Man, they just haven't done it well, man. They just can't do it. It's like the Incredible Hulk. Like they really just haven't done it well.
They have not done the standalone Hulk very well at all. And then they wasted him in Endgame. Was completely wasted in Endgame. Like they made him lame.
Professor Hulk.
Oh yeah, they made him so lame in Endgame.
They did.
So lame.
When he couldn't, like, it wasn't great.
Yeah, it wasn't great. Lame.
I'll say another series of movies that I thought got at least the same, but maybe better. Toy Story was an awesome series of movies. Awesome series. Yes. Okay. I know this because I've been watching it with Juliet the last 2 weeks.
There you go.
So
there you go.
Fantastic.
The original, like the old ones, like the Tom Hanks.
Toy Story 1.
Cool.
Cool. Toy Story 4 wasn't the best, but the first 3 were fantastic. Awesome.
Milton Fan 15 says, does Tommy Rees deserve most of the blame for lack of quarterback development and so many quarterbacks transferring in past years, or does BK? He deserves some for the transfers. And the only transfer I would give him some blame for is Phil Dracovic. Mm-hmm. But I also kind of give him a little bit of a pass because that was his first year as a full-time coach. Remember, he's a GA the year before, even though he's a full-time guy. I think Tommy has learned some things since then. Brendan Clark transferred because he was buried on the depth chart. I don't fault Tommy Rees for that. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But I think one of the misconceptions is I actually think Coach Rees did a good job with Ian Book and Jack Cohn, to be honest with you. I think there was not a lot Tommy Rees could do to make Ian Book any better than he was. I don't think Ian had it in him. Sean Payton couldn't get it out of him. I mean, Sean Payton couldn't get him to throw the ball down the field either. And if Sean Payton can't do it, I'm not going to hold 28-year-old Tommy Rees to that, saying I think he got because I think what he did a good job of is he did a good job of getting Ian in situations where he just, okay, I know this is who he is. And one thing I think Coach Long in 2019 kept trying to get Ian back to being the guy he was in 2018. And it just never happened. I think when Coach Rees took over in 2020, and I don't blame Coach Long for that because, again, we've seen him do it. Why can't he get back to it? And I think a lot of that was with Brian Kelly and just the way that Brian Kelly handled Ian and coached Ian. And I just don't think, then getting rid of Chip Long and all, it was all types of mess that I think were more about Brian Kelly. I think what Tommy Rees did a good job of in 2020 is I know who Ian is. I'm not going to ask him to do things that I know he won't do. I'm not going to keep calling a bunch of post routes and hoping he'll finally throw it. And what's the one post route that he hit? It was an inside post route against Clemson to Avery Davis. Mm-hmm. And even there were still times where, Tommy still didn't pull the trigger when he should have. But I think for the most part, he did a good job of getting the most out of Tommy Rees or out of Ian Book. And the same thing with Jack Cohn is, I thought Jack did a nice job of adapting to the shotgun as the season went on last year and finished the season on a pretty hot note. And once he got some semblance of mediocre offensive line play, and again, a lot of it had to do with the fact they were playing bad D lines, Jack was really good. Mm-hmm. I mean, really good. I mean, Jack's numbers down the stretch were really impressive. And if you expand them over the course of a whole season, he would have had a really impressive season last year. And so I think Coach Rees gets a lot of credit for that. I mean, again, guy completed 65.5% of his passes, starting with he came off the bench, did a great job, or got benched, then came back off the bench against Virginia Tech, led him to a victory. And he kind of woke up after that. He was 71.4% the next week, 66.7 against North Carolina with a couple drops, bad drops, 79.3 against Navy, 75% against Virginia and Georgia Tech, 74.3% against Stanford, 55.9 against Oklahoma State with several drops, but he threw for 509 yards. Yeah. In his last 3 games, he threw for 285, 345, and 509, and threw 9 touchdowns in 3 games. So I think that's the Jack Cohn that we always thought we were going to get. And we saw it against Florida State too. It's just the stuff in between. To me, that wasn't on Jack Cohn. That was more about what was around him. And I think Tommy did a good job of taking a guy who had always been an under center, play action pass quarterback and turning him into a shotgun quarterback where he's got to get rid of the ball quickly. I thought he did a pretty nice job of evolving him. Now, will he be able to do that with Tyler Buckner? That's ultimately what he's going to be judged on.
Yeah.
So I just think most of those issues had to do with BK because, as we've talked about this before, there's way too many voices there. And one of those loudest voices that everybody had to listen to was not always on top of what they were trying to do offensively. And that creates big problems. That's gone now. And Marcus Freeman has made clear, like when I talk to the quarterback, it's in a completely different type of talking. It's about him being the leader. It's about him being, that type of thing. Hey, encouragement, stuff like that. It's not, hey, man, you should have hit this route on this play. It's like, well, that's not the read, coach. That kind of stuff's not going to be happening with Marcus Freeman. I don't believe, based on what he has said and what we've been told. But at this point in time, that's why this year is going to be so important, because you can't use Brian Kelly as an excuse anymore. It's now on Tommy, and that's also partly why I'm optimistic about how things are going to go this year.
Love it.
So here we go. Omar Austin kind of asking a question about our original topic. Is the Nicholas Harbor kid from Maryland the freakiest 2023 recruit? And it's not even close.
It's not even close, Omar. The kid is, if you haven't watched Nicholas Harbor, he's a very raw football player, but my man is 6'5", 220, 10 to 800 meter, I think. So he's flying sub 21 in the 200. Like, this kid, if he wanted to just maintain this weight or even cut a little bit of weight, he probably could be an Olympic runner. Like, that's what type of player he is. But he's probably going to continue to get bigger, whether he's a tight end at the next level, wide receiver, defensive end, linebacker, whatever he ends up playing. Yes, he is a freaky athlete, no doubt.
So on the message board later today, I'm going to be dropping my top 100 for the year. And Ryan and I have kind of gone over it. I've made a couple changes on it based on some of the conversations we've had. I've got Harbor number 6. Yeah. And that could be considered high because of how raw he is. But he's so athletic that he doesn't have to be the most fundamentally sound player. And he could play safety. I mean, that's how athletic he'd be at the most athletic safety in the country. He's built like a defensive end. I mean, he is a freak. And if it wasn't for him, people be talking a lot more about Samuel Mpemba being a freak. But because Samuel Mpemba is not in the same league as Nicholas Harbor, because nobody is, he is without question the biggest freak in this class. There's 3 guys that just, when I think of this class, 4 guys off the top of my head are just freaky athletically. And Nicholas Harbor's 1, Keon Keeley's 2, Caleb Downs is 1, and then Zachariah Branch, the kid going to USC, is another. He is a crazy fast, explosive kid. So, and he will be my number 2 receiver in the class, and he's a top 10 guy as well. So just a little teaser on that one.
You want to talk about generational type of athletes, though? I mean, who's been more impressive to come out of high school than Nicholas Harbor in recent memory? Like, that kid, I mean, 6'5", 220 with 10, 200 meter speed. Yeah. Like, that is nuts, man. That is
I'd be fired up about that if it was a 5'10", 175-pound guy.
Right. Because you're like, wow, there's my deep threat for the next X amount of years. Like, it's insane, man. I got a tip on him from a guy that does has an analytics company. He's like, oh, you need to watch this kid. Like, before he even blew up. And I'm like, what the heck, man? Like, this kid was, I mean, he's literally one of those kids that could be a number 1 overall pick one day if he puts it together. Like, he's that type of athlete. It's silly type of athlete.
Let's go to Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker. Would Tony Rice be in your top 5 Notre Dame players of all time based on his natty and his record against ranked teams in a span of 2 years? I would. What say you guys? Top 5 Notre Dame players of all time. So again, I'm going to always preface this. I will never do a top 5 Notre Dame players of all time. I can't. I never saw Ross Browner play. I never saw Luther Bradley. I never saw Leon Hart. I never saw Paul Herning. I never saw John Hewart. I never saw Angelo Bertelli. I never saw George Gipp. I cannot possibly, because then I'm just comparing statistics, which is also unfair because it's different eras. So I will only ever give a list of guys from my lifetime. And in my lifetime, Tony Rice is in my top 5. No doubt about it. Just because it's not just that he was a winner, because again, that can be inflated. You're all part of a good team, but he was a key part in a lot of those wins, number 1. and he was a dynamic player that you had to always be prepared for. You couldn't put your emphasis on Ricky Waters and Rocket Ismail and these other guys because if you did, he would burn you. And we saw that against USC. They were so worried about the pitch that allowed Tony to just kind of sneak in and just rip off an option run for a big play. And he was always best in the big games. I mean, he was great in the big games. And the other day I was watching the Orange Bowl against Colorado that last year where they played number 1 Colorado and beat him 21-6. And he was just so dynamic, and you just had to handle him. His numbers weren't sexy, but he was a dynamic player. The funny thing is 2 of my top 5 played together, and that's Rocket and Tony Rice.
Do you know who your top 5 would definitely be? Do you have it like
off the top of my head? And again, I reserve the right to go back and change it. So these are not the top 5 most talented players, but just the best.
Sure.
And I kind of go from like 88 to now.
Okay.
You know, I think you have to go Tony Rice and Rocket Ismail for me.
Okay.
Bryant Young, Quentin Nelson, and Manti Te'o are my 5. Yeah, that'd be my 5. Yeah. And I mean, I'm leaving off some stars. I'm leaving off Todd Light. See, Jalen Smith was the most physically gifted player, but Jalen Smith wasn't allowed to be the player he could have been.
Right.
That's the difference. Like if he would have played for Mike Clark Lee, he's number 1 on my list because he was still pretty good. It's just he was not allowed to fully maximize his talent at Notre Dame. So I can't look at him and say, I mean, the guy never had as many tackles for loss in a season as Asmar Bilal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's not his fault, but that's what I'm judging on, right? And so he's not in. He's number 1 if we're talking about who's the most talented offensive players. You know, I'm leaving off Aaron Taylor. I'm leaving off Reggie Brooks. I'm leaving off Jerome Bettis.
Right.
You know, now Jerome became a great player, and Jerome was really good. But I mean, Jerome wasn't even the leading rusher on his team in his last year. Reggie Brooks was. You know, and so. It's a very subjective list. You could, did I say Brady Quinn? I didn't even say Brady Quinn on my list. No. You know, so Brady, there's a lot of guys. Jeff Samars is not on that list. Tyler Eifert's not on that list. Ronnie Stanley's not on that list. I mean, there's some great players not on that list, which is kind of what makes it fun. But yeah, those would be my 5. So Tony Rice, Rocket Ismail, Bryant Young, Quentin Nelson, and Manti Te'o are my 5.
So, love it.
Be curious what some other people kind of think were that. Like somebody said Justin Tuck. He had 1 good year. I mean, really, you know what I mean? Like he was kind of a rotational guy. I'll say this to Lance's comment about Justin Tuck. If Justin Tuck would have come back in 05, there's a good chance he's on that list.
Yeah.
Because that team would have, I still say that team could have played for a title if Justin Tuck would have come back. Mm-hmm. They'd have beat USC because you'd have had him rushing off the edge instead of Ronald Talley on 4th and 9. You know what I mean? So he was a great player.
He sure was.
Somebody said Tim Brown. I didn't really know. I was 10 and 88. That was really the first year that I had a full recollection of that team. And the reason a lot of the guys I talk about from the 88 team are guys that also played in 89 and 90, you know, like Tony Rice and then Rocket and Ricky Waters. I don't talk as much about Frank Stams or Wes Pritchett or guys like that because I didn't see them as much and as I was kind of forming that. So like, Tim Brown, I don't really remember him as much in college, so I can't say him. Now, if you're just going to talk about like recognition and greatness, sure, I'm sure there's a lot of people in the top 5. It's just that was just slightly before my time. There's also a lot more film available of the 88 and 89 team that I've been able to go back and watch. There's not as much of the 87 team to be able to look at Tim Brown. And 86 and 87 are really good. He just obviously won the Heisman in 87. So that's why Tim Brown's not on my list. I just haven't seen enough of him. To be able to do that. And Brady Quinn could potentially be on that list, but Brady had 2 pretty bad years. Again, not his fault. He had 2 pretty bad years, which kind of balances it. And as great as he was, like to me, Bryant Young was just a phenomenal player his whole career. You know,
every step of the way, even to the Hall of Fame.
If somebody's going to put Brady Quinn on the list, I'm not arguing with you. I'm not. If you want to put Jerome Bettis on the list, I'm not arguing with you. If you want to put Reggie Brooks on the list because you thought his 1 year was good enough, I'm not going to argue with you. There's guys you could put on the list that I've had people argue that Julius Jones should be on the list. He had a great single season, but he's not on my list. I mean, there's a lot of Samardzija. I mean, there's a Golden Tate had crazy numbers at Notre Dame. Michael Floyd, finished his career owning every single receiving record at Notre Dame. Yep. There's a lot of guys you could have on the list, but that's what makes it fun. But that's the era I grew up in. Is I left Todd Light off the list. Now he's probably my top 5 of favorite players, but
Mhm.
5 best, again, I would have loved to seen Todd Light play in the modern era. I think his numbers in the modern era would be nuts. Like, I think they'd be absolutely nuts. And did you give your 5, Ryan?
I did not. So I'm in the same boat as you, where my early recollection is like late 90s, early 2000s. So like I'm not going to use any like the early 90s players as well, right? So top 5 that I remember vividly would be some combination of Quentin Nelson, Brady Quinn, Justin Tuck, Jeff Samardzija, and Monty Te'o.
Yeah.
Monty Te'o. Yeah. He'd be number 5. Well, he would be in the top 5. He'd probably be higher than 5, but yeah.
I mean, the guy's a linebacker that finished second in the Heisman Trophy. And that was his least productive year from a tackle standpoint at Notre Dame.
I know. But seven interceptions will do that for you.
Oh, he was great that year. It just goes to show how productive he was in previous years. I mean, he had 113 tackles that year and had 5.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 7 interceptions. 2011, he had 128 tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks. 2010, he had 129 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, and a sack. And then as a true freshman, he had 63 tackles and 5.5 tackles for loss. Manti was an incredible player at Notre Dame. He just played on some bad teams at times until his last year. And then a lot of people I still think hold against him sort of he was not good against Alabama. And then the whole thing with which, you know what? Look, it is what it is. It does not take away from the player he was. He was phenomenal. He was a phenomenal player at Notre Dame.
Sure was.
Jonathan Garbick, do you guys think NFL – and I'm going to let you answer this, Ryan. Do you guys think NFL and NCAA recruit draft put too much emphasis on freak athletes, even though they might not actually be the best football players, NFL especially, in my opinion?
At times, yeah, Jonathan. I mean, it happens. That's why people miss in the draft space, right? Like there's some players who are not tremendous athletes who are just really good football players, and you can't quantify them with a 40 time or a 3-cone or whatever it might be. But I'll also say that part of projecting for NFL and recruiting side of things is to project what a player can be, right? And to project what a player can be, traits are important.
Right.
The physical side of the game does matter. So I think it's a steady balance. But yes, there are some times where you overvalue players that are pure athletes because you think that you can get the most out of them, but they're not natural football players. It absolutely can happen, but it's a very it's a tough balancing act, if we're being completely honest.
Well, and that's what we talked about Nicholas Harbor earlier, right? I mean, you're talking about from a recruiting standpoint, I am going to give more benefit of the doubt to the traits with a high school kid than if I was an NFL team. Because I think by the time a guy's going to the draft, you kind of know what kind of player he is. If he hasn't figured out how to play football by then, like the perfect example, growing up, it was always Mike Mamula, right? But I think the better example in recent years is the kid from UConn that went in the second round. He was not a very good football player at all. Yeah. He was not a good football player. But he goes in the second round. Why? Because he had insane combine numbers.
Yes.
Because, hey, we can teach him how to play football. That's true of a 17-year-old like Nicholas Harbor, who shows some instincts as a football player. He's fundamentally unsound because he plays all over the place. But he shows instincts as a football player. That's the difference. It's not just athletic. And I think that's a trait. And I think the trait that I think people miss on most from a recruiting standpoint is size. And we've talked about this, Ryan. I think people put way too much on big, dominant high school players.
Yeah.
And overlook bad feet, stiff hips, things like that. Because, man, you see how powerful he is. He's going against 225-pound kids. Guess what? He ain't going against 225-pound kids. And sometimes even smaller in college. Can't move his feet, and he's tight-hipped. He can't do this in the next level. Like, there's some guys I've seen ranked in the top 100 as offensive line. Like, that guy's not even top 300 player. He's so physical. Yeah, but he can't move. And college are not just going to run right at him, like they do in high school. He's going to have to move. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, I'm thinking about Keon Keeley or Jason Moore or Damon Wilson going against this kid. And they're going to have 5 flipping sacks, because this kid can't get out of his stance.
Yeah.
But he's big and physical and mauling. And I'm like, And there's even some guys I have ranked high that I just don't feel comfortable with. Like I have the kid, what's his name? Francis Maigoa. I have him ranked in the top 20, and I'm struggling with that one, right? Because he's really dominant. I think he's more athletic, but I'm projecting him to guard. And that's kind of where I feel more comfortable having him there. But even there, I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't feel great about that one because I worry that what I'm seeing is like, is he able to get away with things in high school because he's so big? Now, the thing that I do like about him is he does play against really good competition, so he has been challenged. I've seen film of him going against Jordan Hall and Samuel Mpemba and some of the kids they had last year, and he's winning reps and dominating. So it makes me feel a little better about it. But like, he's an example of someone who I even am aware of the potential that I could miss on this one because he's so big and strong. I think in the NFL, they do put too much emphasis on like combine stuff. And still to this day, it blows my mind to this day. It still happens, which just kind of is like, why? Why does it keep happening?
I think the first recruit we ever talked about, Brian, and this was before I even started working here, was Zach Rice in last year's class, right?
Yeah.
And I was like the same way. I'm just like, he doesn't have very much flexibility to him, right? Like, he's just bullying guys. Like, we'll see how he does at North Carolina. Like, I hope he does really well, but like, I was like, is that a top 10 player? Like, no. I don't know if I see that, man.
Because he was big and strong and physical, but he just couldn't move laterally at all. Brandon Plesser with a question: how's the broad jump translate to on-field performance exactly? Briefly, it doesn't translate directly to on-field performance. Like, hey, if you do a good broad jump, you're going to be a great post-curl runner.
Right.
But it does translate to other aspects that make it important, right?
Brandon, I've had someone ask me this before, and someone asked what combine test best exemplifies projection to the next level, and my answer is broad jump, because I think that you can get a lot of explosiveness out of that drill, and you can see kind of the explosiveness through the hips, and I think that really, like, a 40 time for offensive linemen doesn't really matter when you really think about it, right? There are other drills that they do, and I'm just like, that doesn't matter. Like, I don't care how much a cornerback benches, for instance, right? But broad jump, I think, that can translate to multiple positions, because no matter what position you play, you need to be explosive, right? Like, whether you're an offensive lineman, whether you're running back, whether you're wide receiver, whether you're corner, you need to be explosive. And I believe that the broad jump does exemplify that. Sometimes vertical jump does not do that because there's gravity at some points, right? It's like a guy jumps high, but a guy's a heavier weight, they're not going to jump as high, personally, right? But for a broad jump, I think explosiveness can be very telling for NFL success, and just success on any level, to be honest. So I actually think the broad jump does matter a lot when I'm talking about like verification stuff for testing. That's like my first thing. I'm just like, I want to know what their broad jump was, because I think that can tell a lot about their athleticism.
And that's what a lot of that testing is supposed to do. It's about functional strength and functional athleticism. And then you translate that athleticism to things that you would ask him to do. But I also think that the best way to do it is where I think a lot of scouts go wrong is they focus so much on the combination of the numbers and don't put enough on some of the drill work. I mean, we've seen this before where guys have great numbers and you get them out in the drill work and they're stiff and they're tight and they don't look great actually going through the football drills. But the problem is you can't really test those things. I wish they would. I wish they would do more of that stuff. I wish they would create more football-specific drills that translate to it. Like time a guy, his pedal, open, plant, run. Like, time that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, why not? You time everything else. I mean,
because people are so lazy because they have decades of data on like what a fast 40 time is. So they're like, I don't want to redo that. It's very lazy. It is very lazy. Right. There's no doubt.
So I would love to see like 40 time. I would completely scrap the 40-yard dash for me in the way it is now. I don't care. Like, okay, the 40-yard dash getting into a 3-point stance mattered back in the 1970s when receivers got into 3-point stances.
Sure.
Right. Like Notre Dame in 1988, Rocket Ismail's in a 3-point stance. Right. Okay. He's not going to be in a 3-point stance now. So get him in their specific position that they play in football. Right. Like, what I want to see from an offensive lineman is I want to see him in a pass set and I want to see him, or a run set. Right now, they may be in a 3-point stance. That's one where I actually get the 3-point stance.
Yeah.
Right. I don't need to see a running back in a 3-point stance. When is a running back ever going to be in a 3-point stance? When is a linebacker ever going to be in a 3-point stance? When's a corner ever going to be in a 3-point stance?
Never.
Get them in their corner stance and then have them, or here's an even better one. What I would do with corners is I would have them stand there, flip their hips and then run. Right. Isn't that a better gauge for how it would translate to the football field? Like, that's how you really, does this guy really have closing speed? Or do like a 3-step pedal, open and run, and then time that. Like, I would much rather see that stuff than like football. Like, but here's who is in the 3-point stance: defensive linemen, offensive linemen, and some tight ends. Like, I'd put Michael Mayer in the 3-point stance. I would have not wasted my time putting Kyle Pitts in the 3-point stance. Put receivers in a receiver stance. Get in your stance, and then run, right? And then I don't care about the false starts, because you know what, guys fall. That's the other thing that drives me nuts. The false start stuff. Do it again. Why? Because if a guy false starts all the time, I need to know that as an evaluator. This guy freaking has really bad, technique out of his stance. I should probably know that. That's why his time wasn't good. So that's one of the things I don't like about the combine is like, but that's why people miss so much on these guys, is because the drills are like not really specific to football. Like Ronnie Stanley had a bad combine, really bad combine. Has anyone ever, like, his athletic numbers of the combine were bad, like bad. But has anybody ever questioned Ronnie Stanley athletically as a football player? No. And that's why I say, like, and kudos to the Ravens for not doing that, which is why the Ravens have always tended to be a pretty good franchise.
Too much information makes guys miss, and I will always stand by that.
Was Ozzie still the GM there then?
He should have.
His last pick was Lamar, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, now it's DeCosta, who's actually done a pretty good job.
That would make sense, because Ozzie's a football guy. Literally, he was a football player. He was a great football player in the NFL and in college. So
it's Brian. I was joking with you on the phone earlier, but I'm so serious that I'm going to see a mock draft here soon where Mozzie Smith is in the first round. Yeah, I'm just like, based on what? What are we basing that on? He's supposedly a great tester. Like, okay, all right, It's how guys miss, man. Too much information sometimes makes people miss. There's no doubt.
Here we go. We got a few more before we wrap up here. Jacob Watson says, what do you think Notre Dame has to do to beat Ohio State? Do you think that they can? Let's answer the second part first. Absolutely, they can.
Agree.
Will they? That's a completely different story. But Ryan, why don't you go ahead and take a crack at what they need to do? Just kind of big picture, what are the things that Notre Dame needs to do on all three phases of the game to win this?
I think Notre Dame, to beat Ohio State, needs to score more points than Ohio State. I'm just kidding. Look, I think, Jacob, for me, it's that you know where your strengths are as a football team. I'm sorry. You know where your strengths are as a football team, right? You should be able to have advantages on both sides of the trenches, in my opinion, right? Like, your offensive line should have some advantage against the defensive line, unless the defensive line takes a massive step forward. And I think your defensive line definitely has advantage based on last year's film for what Ohio State has coming back on the offensive line. So I think that's where your strength is. So what am I going to do? I'm going to work to that strength, right? Like, I'm going to say, defensive line, you guys got to be dudes, man. And you have to be able to get home with 4. Offensive wise, you have to be able to push them around a little bit. And you have to be able to dictate you have to work at your own pace, right? And I don't care if that pace is slow. I don't care if you're working fast at times. Doesn't matter. All I know is that you need to be able to run the football. You need to keep the clock on your side. Those are the biggest advantages that you have as a football team, in my opinion, over an Ohio State. The other thing is that you need to limit their playmakers. Everybody knows that they have dudes everywhere. Travion Henderson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., fantastic skill position players. You have to limit how effective they are. You're not going to ever shut them all the way out, right? But you have to limit what they do. And that makes them successful. And offensively and defensively, you need to dominate in the trenches. That is the spot where I need you to have an advantage in order to win this football game. Not even an advantage. Like, you need to dominate, not just be good, not just be a little bit better than Ohio State. You need to be significantly better on both sides of the ball in the front line, in my opinion.
I will. The only part of that I'll disagree with is I don't think Notre Dame needs to significantly dominate the Ohio State defensive line or offensive line. They just need to win that battle, because to win that battle, Notre Dame is good enough a quarterback and running back receiver to make plays on the perimeter. I do agree with you completely on the other side. They have to dominate Ohio State up front. Like, they do. And Notre Dame's defensive line. I think a couple things I'd add is just you need to force them into mistakes. Number one, mistakes aren't always turnovers. Mistakes can also be C.J. Stroud missed an open receiver, because this is what happens when you have a great pass rush. Your corner got burned, but he didn't have time to go to the number 2 read because the pressure was there, so he checked it down. They got a 5-yard completion, but he made the mistake because he didn't see the outside go route coming open, or the post route coming open, or the deep drag coming open, because he didn't have time to get there, or because the pressure is so consistent that even on the play where he maybe had time, in his head, his clock is so sped up that he's not getting to that 3rd read, where that backside corner came open, where he may have banged that in most other games because he's had more time to throw. So those are mistakes. It's not an obvious mistake because if you're watching at home, you didn't see that backside post route come open. You just saw a 5-yard completion. And I think those are things they have to do. And then final, Notre Dame has to control the tempo of this game on both sides of the ball. They have to control the tempo, and that's a big part of it. Then a super sticker. If y'all want to know what it's like or how to become a really good starter as a freshman, and you have to have the psyche to be a successful freshman in college, that's my guy, Tim Opel. He actually started for us at Muhlenberg College. He was starting guard for us on a playoff team, first playoff team in school history. So
Nice.
That's my guy and was a big Notre Dame fan then. I wonder if he remembers when I got in trouble in the Gettysburg game. I got in trouble. The head coach, Coach Donnelly, who passed away recently, great guy, great mentor as a coach. But somebody narked on me from the stands. One of the parents narked on me and told him that I was checking my phone during the game because it was it was an 0-2 is when Notre Dame went down to play Florida State. This is that same day in Ty's first year. And so I'm like checking my little flip phone, the digital, like the green screen and the black words, like to see the score of the game. And I got in trouble. But Tim and his brother are both Notre Dame fans. So love hearing from you, Tim. Hope you're doing well, buddy. Michael S. with a super chat comparison: Tyler Buckner and Lamar Jackson for college. I think they're very different players. Different players.
I mean, first and foremost, as athletes, we talked about Tyler Buckner as like an exceptional athlete, right, Brian? Like what'd you say, like high 4.5, low 4.6 type of athlete, right? Like explosive, physical. Lamar Jackson's one of the best athletes we've seen come out of college in X amount of years, probably since Michael Vick. I mean, if we're being honest, like he is a just silly athlete, right? So I have trouble making that comparison. I will say this, at a young age, Tyler's probably more advanced from a getting through reads perspective, pocket awareness perspective, like that type of situation. But again, Lamar Jackson is one of the best dual threats that we've seen come out of college in a long time, if we're being honest.
Yeah. I love when the fans who have been around for a long time are able to tune in because we get such a different perspective to questions like best ever, right?
Yeah.
So Tom Flavin, who asked a great question, said, been following Notre Dame football since 1953. So he's seen some great ones. Rocket, Tony Rice, Paul Horning, Tim Brown, and Alan Page.
Love it.
Horning, 64 Horning, Brown, Heisman winners. Page was so good. He is also in the NFL Hall of Fame. And he's also a Supreme Court judge, I believe, in the state of Minnesota, correct? So
he's a
tremendous
purple people eater back.
That's
in the
right,
day, man.
Yeah. So I love things like that. Really enjoy seeing those. That's why one of the many reasons I love talking to Lou Emoji was, Lou had such a great perspective on. I mean, he would talk to me about how good Ross Browner was and how dominant Ross Browner was, and I just like the fact that even though he's got 35 years on me from a start point, that we still had two of the same guys, Rocket and Tony Rice.
Yeah.
And so, I dig that. But thanks for putting that list together, Tom. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Michael S. with a super chat. Is Tyler Buckner fragile in the mental game? It seems when things start to go bad, he starts to misfire a lot. Regarding some observations from practice, your view. I can't report. Look, everybody keeps asking us like, well, you guys said this and Irish Illustrated said this. So people see things differently. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Everybody's trying to like start some. Well, they said Drew Pye was better. Okay, so what? That's what they saw. They're giving their honest opinion. We're giving our honest opinion. I would be shocked if somebody said that Tyler Buckner misfires a lot when things start to go bad. First of all, it was a non-padded practice. I doubt Tyler Buckner was worried about the pass rush. But I can't tell you what people are saying. All I know is every person that I've seen that's been in practices has been that I've talked to that I know said Tyler's been really good. And as far as the mental fragile, no, I not even close.
Isn't that one of his biggest strengths? Like I feel like he's like an even keel kid. That's one of his biggest selling points.
Exactly.
He's never too high, never too low. But
yeah. Like I said, people can see different things and be honest in their assessment. Somebody's right, somebody's wrong, but people can, or sometimes it's like degrees or what you're looking for. But it is what it is. Irish Chi-Town, Brian, from the outside looking in, it appears that the players have full trust in Coach Freeman. This didn't always seem to be the case with Coach Kelly. I believe that's true now, but I think there's one final layer for Marcus Freeman to completely earn his players' trust, and that's game days.
Yep.
I think they need success on game days to truly buy in because, buy in, I'm completely bought in. I think these Notre Dame players are as bought in as I've seen since I've been here. right? And I first started covering the team in person in 2010. And that's not a knock on Brian Kelly. It's just the reality of it, okay? There's buy-in here, top to bottom, Freeman on down. There's buy-in here. But that's got to show that at some point in time, the results have to be there on the field. Because if you're bought in, but then you're not getting the results on the field, eventually that buy-in is going to be gone.
Yeah.
And then it's vice versa. You may be getting results on the field, but if you don't trust the coach, you're going to start thinking, well, this is more about us than it is him. And that's what we saw in the past. So that final piece, Ryan, is going to be important. Is the results got to be there on Saturdays. If the results are there on Saturdays, then you're going to see complete buy-in, and this team's going to be really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're struggling for the first month and a half of the season, you're going to see some doubts start to creep in with this team.
Well, I mean, stuff's already creeping in from a fan perspective, right? Like I even parlay this a little bit to the recruiting side of things. It's like people are panicking, right? But the one thing that can solidify everything is if they come out and they play well. Like then you're like, oh, this guy really does know what he's doing, right? Like and not just the, he carries himself well, and it's the, just kind of that brand of everything. It's also like, wow, there's a bigger brand here too, right? Like he knows what he's doing. So I agree completely.
Last question from Archer452 is if Notre Dame is going to win a title in the next 3 years, which year sets up best for them? 2022, 2023, or 2024?
That's a good question.
You want to take a first crack at that, Ryan? I definitely have some thoughts on this question.
My initial thought is 2023. And the reason for that is I feel like the class that we spend the most time talking about a ton is the sophomore class this year. So that is the Joe Alt, Blake Fisher, Tyler Buckner, Logan Diggs, Audric Estime, like Lorenzo Styles, like that one. I think when those guys are juniors, obviously they're going to have the extra year to hopefully get to closer to their ceilings. And I also think that at that point, a couple of those guys may be in contention to leaving the draft early. Like I don't think that they're all 4-year players, obviously, right? So I think when you have that team as a juniors, you have this 2022 recruiting class that now is working in the sophomore years, and then you have those freshmen coming in. Hopefully a couple of them with how good that class is, I anticipate a couple of them coming in and having some type of impact in 2023. That's where I think like collectively you have what I think could be a star class for the sophomore players this year, combined with these previous two classes. I think that's where that's where I really think that they could explode. I think they have a chance to be really good this year, but like next year, when all those guys are a junior, I think that that's a really good opportunity.
It's kind of funny. That would actually be the year that I'd have at the bottom of my list of the three. And I understand completely, but the one part that I would talk about is is the schedule set up for it. And I think, next year you're talking about you got to play Ohio State at home. You got to go to Clemson. You've got NC State on the road. 2024 schedule is going to be tough too. You got to play at USC and at Texas A&M. Very tough games. But you get Miami at home. You get Virginia at home. You get Florida State at home. You get Stanford at home. So I think, and then to your point, there will be some guys gone in 2024 from that 21 class. Maybe Blake Fisher or Joel or both. You may not have Lorenzo Styles at that point in time. Chris Tyree is going to be gone. There's going to be some guys that are going to be gone. But I look at it and I say that 21 class, you're going to still have some guys left over. There's going to be some guys still here. The 22 class, defensive class, is going to be juniors then, which I think is an excellent class. And the 23 class, which is going to be phenomenal, will be sophomores. And you're then going to bring in the 2024 class, which I think is going to be loaded as well. So I just think from a pure athleticism standpoint, I really like that class. And playing against, Texas A&M and USC, even though I do think USC is going to be pretty good by then, like really good by then, to me doesn't necessarily concern me as much as playing Clemson and Ohio State. So I think Tyler Buckner will be a senior then. Now, if you're going to be able to peer into the future and say Tyler Buckner's gone in 24, then 23 jumps up to number 1 on my list. And here's why. If Tyler Buckner's good enough to leave in 2023, after 23, it means Notre Dame had a phenomenal season. And that jumps him way up the list. But I anticipate him coming back as a third-year starter, and he's going to have Tobias Merriweather's going to be a junior. One of Estime or Diggs will be back as seniors. You'll have Jadarian Price will be a junior. You'll have Eli Raridan and Holden Stace will be juniors. You're going to have the receiver class this year is going to be sophomores. You're going to have, the great defensive players in the 2022 class are, like I said, going to be juniors, plus Keon, and those guys are going to be sophomores. I think this is going to be a team that's going to be really long and athletic and talented by then.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing what that team can be. I really am.
How about all three? Can we settle on that one?
Yeah, I think it'll be really good. And the other thing is, like, is Riley Mills a 5th-year guy or not? There's all types of things like that. But it's going to be fun to watch.
Is Lorenzo Styles back for his 4th year?
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
But even I'm anticipating him not. Even if he's not, it's like you talk about Tobias Merriweather's going to be a junior. Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas will still be here. Plus Greathouse, Braylon James, Dylan Edwards, Rico Flores, Eli Raridan, Holden Stace, Cooper Flanagan, Kane Barong. You kind of start looking at, it's going to have a really talented group of guys, and that's part of what makes it fun. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I want to appreciate all of y'all for being here with us today. Good crowd today. Much more lively and positive discussion about just today. It was just much better vibe, less arguing and bickering and all those different types of things. So I really appreciate y'all being a part of what we're doing here. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe bell. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. And, of course, sign up for the message board. We finally, I think, got the bugs worked out. It was smoking fast last night, Ryan. Hasn't gone down the last couple days. As I say that, I got to have some wood. I don't know if this is real wood or not, but I'm knocking on it anyway. So hopefully this thing keeps rocking and rolling tonight. So tune in tonight at 6 o'clock Eastern. Sean Stiers is going to be back. They're going to talk about linebackers. I think they're going to have some thoughts on the freaks list as well. So you'll get a different perspective on that. And then they're going to talk a lot about the Notre Dame linebackers. Obviously, Sean was there yesterday. Got to interview Al Golden, got to interview James Laurinaitis, got to interview the Notre Dame players. So they're going to talk a lot about the Notre Dame linebackers tonight and even more about the Notre Dame practices. So really appreciate y'all very, very much. We're both trying to click on Mesa's thing at the same time. So take Mesa AK's advice, everybody. And if you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. We would appreciate that very, very much. And visit the IB store to get that smooth Brian and Ryan polo, as you can't see it if you're listening via podcast, but it is a really, really sweet polo and very comfortable. That's the thing. It's very comfortable. Anyway, have a great day, everybody, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon.